to the 21st meeting of the Committee for Finance in the 22 to 27 mandate, which is the first of this new Assembly session. Welcome back from recess. Obviously, we've all been working hard and we've had lots of correspondence, which we'll discuss as the meeting goes on. This meeting, as always, will be broadcast online and throughout Parliament buildings. You're free to use your phone as long as it is either in airplane mode or muted, and you can people can connect to Assembly Wi-Fi. As always, agenda item 1 is apologies. We have received apologies. We haven't any apologies, but Deirdre is due to join us.
We have received apologies from Nicola Brogan as well.
We have now received apologies from Nicola Brogan. Additionally, I don't think Deirdre's online yet, but she is due to join us. She's on the call because she is due to join us. Okay, yes, no problem. So there are. She will no doubt join us in due course, and we may have, I think, 1 or 2 members who have to briefly pop out. So we may be briefly not called for any votes, but I think we can proceed with evidence. Okay, so today's business, we will have 2 oral briefings from departmental officials on the deaths and stillbirths registration legislation that we've talked about before, and also the rating policy consultation that we've also talked about at different times. Agenda item 2 is the declaration of interests. Members, as always, you're obliged to declare any relevant financial or other interests at each committee meeting as applicable. Would anyone like to declare an interest? No? Okay. Agenda item 3, and there are several items under this heading, is the chairperson's business. 3.1, so we have correspondence in from the head of the civil service following briefing on the 26th of June. That's at page 6 of the meeting pack. That correspondence is merely to note at this point. The head of the civil service is entitled to send whatever correspondence she wants, but obviously that is merely to note at this stage. If anybody wants to say anything, the next agenda item is the Fiscal Council Annual Conference on the 22nd of October 24. The Fiscal Council has invited me to speak at the second annual conference, 22nd of October. The final agenda is likely to be influenced by developments between then. I plan to attend to speak on behalf of the committee, and will speak in that context. And if I appear on a panel additionally, I will probably make some remarks as leader of the opposition. So to, I suppose, assure colleagues that it will be clear where I'm making remarks in my capacity as chair, and when I take my hat off and make more political remarks. But hopefully I'm quite good at drawing that distinction when I need to. So if people are content, I will attend. I should also say, I would imagine that any other member who wishes to attend is also, there will be a standing invitation to any member, I'm sure any member of the Assembly, particularly members of the Finance Committee. And I don't know if they finalised the agenda, but certainly it was really useful last year, and they were keen to hear. I was just there. I attended for a while as an audience member and contributed, and it was a useful discussion. So, although it is a plenary day, I would encourage any members who are able to make it to do so. Next agenda item is the Human Rights Commission, the annual report on implementation of Article 2 of the Windsor Framework. This is at page 9 of the meeting pack. The invitation was emailed to you directly on the 7th of August, and I think it's tomorrow. So if you wish to go tomorrow, by all means, RSVP. The next agenda item is agenda item 3.4, which is a departmental press release on the investment fund. So members, at page 10 of the meeting pack, you will see that there is a featured press release which is about the 2 loans being dispersed to hotels from Northern Ireland Investment Fund, which is if I've got it right, an executive-backed but CBRE, a commercial property investment company, or commercial property company managed fund to encourage private sector investment in a range of areas. I think it would be useful to seek a written briefing, because we haven't actually discussed the Northern Ireland Investment Fund thus far in this mandate. I certainly always keen to see investment of any kind of job creation. I think it would be useful in advance, well, first of all in our written briefing, to get a clear sense of the disbursements, what is the loans that have been made, the oversight, the oversight role the department exercises, how it exercises that, and I think given, if you go on the website, they list the different sectors that they lend to, that they prioritise. Some of them are so things like hotels, student accommodation, ranging to various types of low carbon, photovoltaic, etc. kind of projects. I think it would be useful to get a breakdown of how much lending has actually happened under each heading, just to see the proportion, and that will probably tell us useful information generally. I'm sure it'll be useful to the Economy Committee too. Steve Aiken.
I think I would welcome that. I think it's probably a good news story that hasn't been very well reported, and it'd be useful for them to come and tell us about it. I think and also bearing in mind some of the challenges we have in other areas, it might be a future model for other areas of investment, and it would just be useful for us to understand sort of the governance and structure and how it's laid out.
Well, I think it would also be useful to know, and I'm not presupposing because we don't have the information, if there's, if they're confident that there's enough, as it were, additionality in the investment fund, or in the investment activity, because obviously there has been significant investment without, as it were, state help in purpose-built student accommodation and hotels. So it would appear that it's not, the pump doesn't need to be necessarily primed that much in that space, but it would be helpful. But that's not to say that it's not welcome investment. It's just to get a clear understanding that the department is confident that they're leveraging investment in areas that might not otherwise happen, which I presume is part of the point of the lending. Okay, if members are happy enough, we will write to ask that written briefing. And then with a view to potential oral briefing at a later date, and a site visit again, if that's useful. Okay, next agenda item is indicative timings for the budget cycle. The department has provided us with indicative timings for the budget cycle 24-25. These are indicative on the timing of the settlement letter from the Secretary of State, and then obviously subject to the things being agreed by both the Executive and then the Assembly Business Committee. So that is at page 14 of your meeting pack, and it is a table that was helpfully emailed by the Dallo, who is with us, to the committee, and will be useful for our planning and no doubt others. But there is also a piece of information which has come to us. I'm not sure if it was in that email or we found out separately. We found out separately that that the department has undertaken over the summer an urgent budget information gathering exercise, which sounds like a version of the monitoring round process, and I presume is partly linked to being prepared for a new UK government and potential and a fiscal event later this year. But it did, one of the things that was asked in that exercise was departments being asked what spending could cease from the 1st of October. If members are content, I think it would be helpful for us to ask for a bit more detail, first of all, on the context as to why they're starting that process now, whether it's just a kind of sped up part of the budget cycle because there's a new British government, or if there's some other particular reason, or were they told to, or did they do it in consultation with the Treasury? But then secondly, what responses, I think is really important, they got from departments. If anybody wants to come in on that, I'll just go to the Deputy Chair first and then go to Steve Aiken. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks Chair, and even just to add into that, if you're asking those questions, how they feel this aligns with the Programme for Government and its timing as well as it progresses.
Yeah.
No, second, it's this week. I think the Deputy First Minister and the Finance Minister yesterday, at sort of the various things that she was speaking about, alluded to this meeting she's having with Rachel Reeves tomorrow. I think we should probably get ask for an early readout of that meeting, and I think it ties in, Chair, with what you were saying before about sort of those, and also what the Deputy Chair and about PFG. I mean, I think it's quite important that we get to understand that before we start moving on, just thinking of the programme for next week and some of the stuff in budgetary bills and the rest of it's coming through. Just think an early readout, I think, would be very useful of those good discussions, because I think there may be germane for a whole lot of things that are going on at the moment.
I think that's sensible. Yeah. Content with that. Jerry, Karen.
Just following that, Chair, in regards to the meeting, there's been a lot of conversation over the weekend in regards to sort of wealth taxes, and a 1% wealth tax on the wealthiest 1% would raise £25 billion, I think, in money to the Treasury. So I think we should propose as a committee that should be raised with the Chancellor as a way to kind of fund the public services gap that we're currently facing.
I certainly think we can, as part of our correspondence to the Minister, we can say that members raised a range of questions. One of them was around that, and ask if, given I think that the Assembly passed a motion yesterday which talked about Owen Tennyson drafted, so it was progressive taxation, so we can ask whether the Minister intends to raise that issue with the Chancellor. I think that's fair enough. Any other comments? Okay, we will do that. I think we can follow. We could say reflecting the comments made in the Assembly, in the Finance Committee, and in the Assembly motion, whether other forms of ideas for taxation in terms of progressive taxation, whether that's wealth tax or any other, were raised, because I think it went through without a division ultimately in the end yesterday. It did talk about progressive taxation, so I think it's reasonable enough that we ask the Finance Minister if she's raising that issue with the Chancellor. So people are happy enough. We'll also get the responses on the budget monitoring round. The next agenda item is the draft programme for government, which we've obviously been talking about a lot this week, and I'm sure we'll talk about a lot more in the weeks to come. It's out for consultation, and as part of this, the Executive Office Committee will be seeking a view from this committee. So we will request a briefing from the Department of Finance. It's worth saying that my view, I don't know if others share it, is, but having talked about it to the Deputy Chair and the Clerk, I think obviously we have, in addition to the work of the Department in specific programme for government outcomes in a cross-cutting way, obviously we have a particular strategic delivery scrutiny role because the budget is completely inherent to the programme for government. So I think we should ask, if people are happy, and I'm sure there is a work strand going on to align the programme for government outcomes with budget, and indeed, in fairness, I think both the Finance Minister and maybe the First or Deputy First Minister said that too. So if people are content, we'll request that briefing from the Department. Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree with you. There's the dual strands of the Department of Finance of, for ourselves scrutinising for programme for government in terms of what the Department of Finance are doing, but also that central oversight role. So I just wanted to understand if there anything else that the committee wanted to take forward in terms of our plan here for responding as a committee to the draft programme for government. I totally agree with the Chair, liaise with the other departments and how their budget aligns with programme for government, but was there anything that we want to have as a plan in terms of our response over the next 8 weeks as a committee? That's
a fair question. I think, can I suggest as a first step we ask for a prompt answer from the department on how they intend, what their sort of, as it were, strategic approach is to aligning the programme for government to budget lines. If we get that promptly, then we can then make a decision maybe next week about whether we should, for example, build in a specific strand of, build that specifically into our work, or even have a specific. We could think about a report, like we could discuss a specific report from the committee.
I'm just thinking something akin to what we did around budget. It's a short, sharp exercise, but it allows stakeholder groups to have a say. And we can do that in parallel with the consultation period, which obviously there'll be responses to that anyway, and we'll be copied in a lot of those, I would imagine. But it allows the committee to be very specifically talking to stakeholder groups and getting direct dialogue with them if members are content to organise that.
Just to, again, take our role here to push to the other departments of, whilst they're doing their feedback on what they feel are priorities in programme for government, how does the budget align and what can you afford there, just to provide that.
I think that's a fair question. We could ask that we could send out early letters to the other committees to say we are considering how best we contribute as a committee to scrutiny of the programme for government. As part of that, obviously we don't want to create extra work unnecessarily for the committees, but we could ask them, will you feed back to us
Chair, I think
on
I would anticipate
how your departmental's budget planning is delivered?
I'd anticipate most of the committees will seek a briefing on PFG, and what had occurred to us, we were talking about this, is to ask them to also seek more information on how objectives, targets and so on actually align to budget. It's the idea of trying to pin down where the budget goes in terms of the PFG. It's an exercise we've talked about before, but I think we maybe have a better handle on it now.
Yeah.
I might also, if members are agreeable, pop into next week's pack how the Scottish PFG looks, because it's really nicely laid out in terms of where money follows.
Yeah, I think that's important. So can I suggest then, Diane, that we get off letters to both the department and the other committees, ideally with certainly a prompt response from the department, and then we put this in the chairperson's business to revisit next week, where we can decide a more specific approach to scrutiny over the next few weeks. Because I think it definitely is urgent that we do it properly, and if necessary, if there's other stuff we can shunt, we can talk about that in the programme when we look forward to the forward look later on. Okay, people are happy enough. We will then move on to the next agenda item, is draft minutes of not last week, but the meeting on the 3rd of July. It does just feel like last week now. Obviously, on the 3rd of July, there was one or two other things on elected politicians' minds on Wednesday, the 3rd of July. We had it was the last meeting before term. But if people are content that they are a true reflection of what was discussed and agreed, I will sign the minutes. Mm-hmm. Content, okay. The next agenda item is matters rising, and if members go to page 28 to 114 of the meeting pack, they were previously emailed. You were previously emailed copies of the detailed transformation proposals submitted by the department to the Interim Public Sector Transformation Board. Proposals were submitted in the following areas: integrate programme, which I think is worth saying is very worthy and important, but was happening anyway. So it's not a new, swanky new transformation idea, because it's been in the pipeline for ages. So one might argue that it's not a genuinely new bit of transformation. That's not to say it's not important. So the Integrate Programme, the LPS Strategic Asset Management Unit, which I think has also been in the pipeline for a while, Next Generation Citizen Services, NISRA Transforming Data Collection, Analytics and Dissemination, Civil Service Workforce and Organisation of the Future, and the Future of Records Management for NICS. An update briefing on the proposals and work of the interim board is scheduled for Wednesday the 25th of September. Who is giving us that briefing?
That will be the interim board.
That will include the head of the civil service?
I mean officials.
Officials.
So the officials within DOF, because we've requested.
So not Jane Brady or Francis Duran, etc.
The original discussion was around we'd wanted the actual board that's in place to come.
Yeah.
So that wasn't going to be ready. It appeared by then. So we'd asked for officials. I'm looking at the Dallo, and potentially if members wanted to go for the interim board itself, that would be more complex in the trying to align diaries. If members are content for that meeting, if members engage with the officials, then we can work on, because I'm also going to look at the Dallo again and say that the permanent board isn't in place, and I don't have a timeline for that. So the timeline isn't available to us. So it might be a case of having an interim briefing, and then once we get, the intention was always, once we had the board, the actual board, we would have them in to talk through that.
Do we know yet? Dear's join us. Okay. Do we know yet when we're going to have the board, the full final board?
We don't have a time scale for that.
So I'll come into you in a second. See, we are in a slightly strange position with the Public Service Transformation Board, because we're now 7 months in since restoration. They're the other bits of seem to be moving forward. There's an interim fiscal framework. There is a budget sustainability plan which we're going to get at the end of this month, apparently. But I don't particularly feel like I've got a grip on what's exactly happening with the Public Service Transformation Board. Obviously, they've given us the terms of reference and the scorecard, and we know the kinds of things that have bid in, but we only have an interim board, and if I'm bluntly honest, a lot of the context appears to be funding for things that's already happening, but it's called transformation. and a sceptic might say this might have been agreed right at the beginning in February and has kind of been backfilled, not necessarily backfilled, that's probably the wrong word, but there isn't necessarily a huge amount of detail yet in terms of how transformational, how ambitious any of the bids are. So it would be helpful to get that briefing, and indeed it would be helpful to get a written update on all of this before we have the briefing on the 25th September. Steve, you wanted to
just a few things, Chair. First one is, it's an interim board, but this could be an interim board for an extremely long time. And I'm not quite sure where the emphasis is or the push is to actually have the proper board constituted. And those of us who have read assiduously the new draft programme for government will notice the conversations about the reform unit and where that's likely to sit within it. I would quite like to press to actually meet the board itself, the interim board, because I'm not so sure where I like you, Chair, I'm not quite sure where this all sits together and how long this is going to be an interim structure. It could be a very long time or it could be a very short time.
Well, in fairness, I think a fortnight probably is a bit ambitious to get the interim board, but I do think we should get the interim board. We should aim to get them sooner rather than later. Someone else wanted to come in? Diane, so apologies.
Yeah, sorry, thanks, Chair. And just to follow on from Steve Egan there, perhaps it would be an idea if we're asking for the world briefing, we ask for a timeline of when they're meeting. So at least if we knew when they were meeting, rather than them coming back to us when we suggest dates, that it's hard to align diaries. If we know when they're already meeting, is there some way we can work around that? Because they're all going to be in the one place, and if the two works together, I would agree that it would be good for us as a committee to lip in with the board.
Yes. I agree with that. So I think that written briefing and then a request to meet, having had briefing on all, even if we still have questions on all the other bits of the package and their progress.
Just so I'm fully up to speed. So still having the arrangement for the officials on the 25th as well.
Yes, please. Yeah, I think that's the right thing to do. But I also think it would be. The officials. Members are content with that.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay. Next agenda item is statutory committee scrutiny of the 24-25 budget. Members, in May, way back in May, we discussed the lack of scrutiny of the 24-25 budget, specifically the lack of information received by statutory committees, and we agreed to write to the Minister about this. The Minister has indicated that 3 templates were provided for all departments to complete during a commissioning exercise following the restoration of the Executive. The templates have now been provided along with the commissioning letter which accompanied them. The Minister has also indicated that individual departments and ministers are responsible for their own engagement with Assembly committees. Going forward, the Minister hopes that the budget process will be more routine. I mean, we feel like we always hope that. That is a fairly routine wish in this place. And where circumstances permit, the intention would be to produce a draft budget which will be consulted on before a final budget is agreed by the Executive. The Minister indicates that this approach will allow more time for committee scrutiny. So, members, if people are content, we will send the letter and the attachments to other statutory committees indicating that they may wish to request these templates from their departments going forward. I don't know if there's a way to logically loop this in with our ask from them on the programme for government so that they get a sense that there's a kind of consistency with these asks.
Yeah, we can roll those 2 items together when we go out to the other committees.
Okay.
Also, just to flag up, anything like this that we receive, we're gathering together. We're going to build a resource. I'm saying that, it sounds very grand, but the idea will be that it'll provide a sort of go-to resource for all the statutory committees to know what's going on, what sort of templates there are, what they look like, when to ask, and all those kinds of issues. It's something we've tried to do through memoranda with departments before, but I think maybe if we just have all of that in one place for committees to get at, it might be useful.
Okay. People are content? The next agenda item is strategic lawsuits against public participation, aka SLAPPs. At page 135 of the meeting pack, you will find this correspondence. At the meeting on the 19th of June, members agreed to write to the Finance and Justice Ministers to seek views on the apparent anomaly whereby the Department of Finance has a policy interest in relation to SLAPPs, but DOJ officials sit on the UK SLAPPs task force. The Minister has indicated that both departments liaise closely on a range of civil law reform and civil justice matters and do so frequently. The Minister has also provided an assurance that DOF will continue to work with DOJ to ensure that all relevant issues are fully considered, and should any policy be introduced, the support of several departments and probably the executive would be required, along with the full scrutiny of the Assembly. So if members are agreed, we'll share the response with the Justice Committee. I would just say in parenthesis, I do remain slightly bemused by the fact that civil justice as a policy continues to sit with the Department of Finance. I think it's bizarre, frankly, and I think the Finance Minister and the Finance Department have quite a lot on their plate, and I think this draws attention to the fact that there isn't really any logical reason, in my view, for this to continue to sit with, and that is not in any way an aspersion on either minister, but it just seems illogical. I think in other relevant jurisdictions they would simply have civil and criminal justice in the same department, given that, as they say, they have to work together closely anyway. I don't think it makes a huge amount of sense when it comes to, for example, the main work of the Finance Department, which is fiscal financial policy, spending controls, and all the rest of it. But that's my tuppence. Paul Fruit?
Yeah, just on that, Chair, I agree with you with regards to that. And since this is an area that is going to change over the next couple of months and years, the letter doesn't seem to state clearly who will actually run with that change if it was to be brought in Northern Ireland. So I take it that it's the Department of Finance, but it doesn't explicitly say that in their letter, other than just saying that they'll work closely with the Department of Justice and then any other departments that are involved.
I mean, my own view on that is that I agree with you on that, Paul. I think that this is an area of significant policy interest. I think it's given Northern Ireland it is widely believed that Northern Ireland has a particularly, shall we say, vexatious tendency, and there are particular concerns, which is why there was a private member's bill brought in the previous mandate. So I think there is I think it's unusual, but in any case, I think it's something for us to keep an eye on and possibly bring back for discussion in the future. Members are content.
Chair, just on that, we have the same officials, because as you know there are only 3 of them, and they always have to come up with anything around civil law reform. We have them up in the next couple of weeks on marriage bill. It might just be worth getting their take on how this would. They gave us a conceptual analysis of how it would go forward, but actually finding out where finance officials sit with it and where justice officials sit.
I mean, I also just think, if you're the finance, to be fair to the Finance Minister, she has a big job to do, and her job every day is thinking about how am I going to get a better deal from the Treasury, how am I going to have conversations about spending settlements with other ministers, how are we contributing strategically. To put myself in her shoes, and obviously you don't automatically go to a kind of extraneous policy area. The Justice Minister's job is fundamentally, one of the core jobs is law reform and the justice system. That is her job. So I don't know why it doesn't make more sense to have this within the Justice Department, because I think it more logically sits with the Justice Minister, who is thinking about these things. But in any case, I think we've said our piece, or I have anyway. Okay, the next agenda item is disciplinary matters in relation to the RHI inquiry. Members, you should, this is page 141 of the meeting pack, you should note the official sensitive marking on the response. At the meeting on the 19th of June, the committee requested an indication of broad thematic areas to be addressed in the revised civil service disciplinary policy. The department has indicated that thematic areas to be addressed in the revised policy will include potential changes to decision-making authority in misconduct cases, including serious and gross misconduct, and the handling of serious or gross misconduct cases which involve systemic or cultural failures affecting the wider organisation. It is also indicated that proposed changes are subject to consultation with Central Trade Union side, and the committee will be apprised of the policy changes in detail once this required process has concluded. So members, that is to note this update at that point, if they'd like to. Steve Aiken.
Just a quick one. And I'm aware of the official sensitive and policy under development, so I'm not particularly going to the details. This goes back quite a long way. I mean, this first came in front of the committee, Matthew, we had this up a long time, and it was said it was imminent then, and here we are in 2024, and it's still Eminent, could we ask for a update on the timeline rather than it will be concluded? Because there must be a process that and timings they're looking towards. I just think that this has gone on for a very long time.
Yeah, yes, indeed. Yeah. When it comes to the sensitive marking, I must say treats to why it's got a sensitive marking, because it's about as.
Yeah.
I can't see who would be particularly.
No,
shocked
I'm not going there, but sort of.
Anyway, okay. Yes, it has been running for a long time, so I think that's a reasonable information request. Okay, if people are content, we'll move on to the next agenda item, which requires in relation to non-domestic RHI business case addendum. At the meeting, which is on page 142, at the meeting on the 19th of June, Minister's members raised questions and issues in relation to obtaining copies of information and clarification that had been requested by the Department of Finance from the Department of Economy in relation to non-domestic RHI business case addendum. DOF has engaged with the DFE, and it is felt that the documents requested are supplementary to the business case, and it would be inappropriate to send them to the committee. Okay. The Department of Finance has sent detailed information on the responses provided by the DFE to address DOF's queries, and indicated that DOF approval for DFE to commit expenditure to the tariff uplift was confirmed on the 24th of June. This is subject to executive approval this is subject to executive approval and DOF standard conditions of implementation within 12 months. So, members, this is to note the information, but one or two members might wish to come in. The Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Whilst it's good to see a response in, I'm disappointed with this once again, because what we had requested was a closed session conversation to get a ballpark for an estimation of what sort of money we're talking about. The percentages and details and things in the table are great if you know what numbers you're dealing with, and I think as a Finance Committee what we were actually looking for was just a conversation in a closed session to get an idea of what sort of money we were talking about here. So I would like to follow that up again, because I feel like that's what we asked for the last time.
Well, I am sympathetic to that. I mean, a short oral briefing I think might well be in order. I think we're getting into a lot of kind of back and forward on process, which is not really fundamentally what we're that interested in, and slightly absurd things about marking documents. And like ultimately we're all adult, given we've had a situation where we had to do a closed briefing on an anonymised summary of consultation responses, and that did not leak to the Wall Street Journal and move the markets. So I assume we could probably do a closed briefing on this if we can get hold of one. Does anybody else wish to come in?
No, it's just it just seems ridiculous. All we wanted to know was the quantum, because it's our job to look at the finances. It's not.
I think that's
that's all we wanted.
I know the Economy Committee is obviously looking at this as well, but that's fine. If we can get a, and I assume members will be content if it is stipulated that we do a briefing in closed session, and we'll respect it. Paul Frew.
Yeah, just to echo the sentiments of the Deputy Chairperson with regards to the knowledge that we want to obtain. Shouldn't really be that sensitive, although I realise that they were in and are still in, I suppose, to a certain degree, decision-making process. That seems to have been determined and come out the other end of that process. So it's important for a scrutiny committee to be able to look at the nuts and bolts of a decision-making process, as much as scrutinise the decision they took. And just on your own point, Chair, with regards to why documents are signified as official sensitive, it's probably because the civil service are sensitive to talk about these matters more than anything else. So it still leaves me with a blindsided insight into how we're at this juncture, and how these people, the recipients of the scheme, have been let down so far. And there's nothing in this information that we've received that assuages my concern or gives me confidence that they'll be treated any different in the future.
Okay.
Just wanted to make the point, Chair, so the figures were made available in public session in the Economy Committee this morning, so there's no reason why the Finance Committee shouldn't get them.
There you go. We've made our point. Thank you for that. Okay, we'll now move on to, and I think there is a lesson there for officials in terms of the being overly cautious in terms of sense of whether it also, I mean, I'm sort of making this comment for people for officials who will be paying attention to hear there's a slightly boy who cried wolf quality to trying to protect information which is not ultimately going to be all that sensitive, is that because you devalue the trust on which members have to operate when there is genuinely sensitive information which they have to and should respect. Anyway, I think the points have been well made. The next item, Department of Finance scrutiny points from Module 4, Public Scrutiny Finance Training, or Public Finance Scrutiny Training, one of those two, I'm not sure which, in-year monitoring. So members at page 148 of the meeting pack, following in-year monitoring, we agreed to send the scrutiny points identified in the training to the Department for response. So members, that response is to note. It's at page 148, unless anybody wishes to make a comment. At page 1553, on the 19th of June, we discussed how the budget was developed by the NIO during the time when no executive was in place. We agreed to seek information on the role that the Department of Finance played in providing that information to the NIO during the absence of an executive, as well as meetings that it attended and checks carried out. So that information is largely to note. I think it is interesting. It's relatively brief and factual, as you would anticipate, but it is there, and I think useful for the record for us. And hopefully, it won't become relevant again for a very long time, or ever. The next agenda item is use of ISNI investing activity reports and quarterly updates on city and growth deals. I think this was something that the Deputy Chair and Philip Brett were particularly interested in, and rightly so. At page 154 of the meeting pack, you will see the response that we have, that we agreed to ask the Department if the ISNI investing activity reports could be used to track all of the capital expenditure arising from the city and growth deals. The city and region growth deals, I should say. The Department has indicated that the ISNI reports do not appear to include detail on expenditure, but rather are used for transparency purposes for contractors, highlighting information about public sector projects in the pipeline. Information about expenditure on city and growth deals is outlined in a number of other reports as detailed by the Department, one of which is a quarterly update report. April and July reports have been provided to the Department. Those are sort of to the committee. They are at 156 at Annex A. It's not a table, it's kind of a PDF. Well, there is a table then beneath that. As members, I'd like your agreement to ensure that in future quarterly reports are sent to the committee, because it seems like we've got, and asking for the ISNI thing has led to the actual say, well, we don't. It's not an ISNI, but we do have all of it here, if that's what you're looking for. So, so it just shows that it is sometimes worth being pestering for the information, because quite often it is there down the back of the sofa. I don't mean that to be facetious, but it's useful that we have it. So if people are content, we'll ask that they are sent to the committee on a rolling basis, and then obviously we can keep an eye on it and decide whether we wish for an oral briefing. We'll also share it with the Economy Committee, which obviously is an interest. Does anybody want to come in or make a comment? Okay. Agenda item 5.9 relates to a member of the public and correspondence on issues in relation to NIC's recruitment exercise and an AQW on a pre-recorded interview process. Members will appreciate that whilst the committee will not pursue individual complaints, this item of correspondence, remember, the public, relates to a wider issue previously discussed at the committee pardon me, on the 3rd of July.
Right. Sir Chair, I just need a declaration of interest. It might be one of my constituents might be involved in this, so I will not take any further part in this conversation. Okay. Thank you. So apologies for that. I hadn't realised until we... That's fine.
It's obviously totally fine to declare an interest as we go along. So the committee, so we, as I say, we won't pursue individual complaints, but there is an item of correspondence which relates to a broader issue. A written answer given to an assembly question regarding the high number of candidates who were unsuccessful in the pre-recorded interview process, predominantly due to end-user candidate technical issues, sound and or video, and not the NICS HR platform. The committee had agreed to seek an explanation for the high number of candidates identified. The departmental response, which is at page 164 of the briefing pack, outlines the context for the high numbers of unsuccessful candidates for this particular exercise, as well as the work ongoing to examine potential improvements which could mitigate the mitigate the issues and improve the candidate experience. So there's some a detailed explanation there in relation to technical issues that individual candidates have. Jerry?
I'd raised it at a previous meeting with officials several months ago, and I'm just looking back on the departmental response. 427 candidates unsuccessful due to technical issues. Is quite a high figure of any process. Now the response is claiming it's on both ends. No doubt there would have been in any interview process, but I think the original email that I received was basically highlighting that the process from the civil service end was deeply flawed, and even that response from the department, civil service rather, confirms that. So I just think it's requires us to maybe shed a bit more light on these types of practices and whether they're worthwhile or not.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the only outstanding question, one of the outstanding questions that occurs to me is whether are there any instances in which or how many instances are there where a candidate was unsuccessful through a technical issue that was just not their own fault?
Hasn't detailed that, sure.
And I think that's a reasonable question to ask. So I think if we could go back and ask that. It's one. There's some of them appear to be things like someone did a Zoom or Teams interview from another country, and that apparently is against the rules. I think it would be helpful to get a bit more detail on that, because that seems ever so slightly arbitrary to me. I don't quite know why it's that. I don't quite know if someone is. Someone living in Derry is applying for a civil service job and happen to be in Donegal that afternoon and they're doing the Zoom, I don't quite know why they should be disqualified. Or even, to be honest, if someone's on holiday, and I don't know that is in itself disqualifying if there's already an agreement, but I think we could ask those things. Paul, if you want to come in too.
Yeah, on that very point there, if the whole benefit of this is to widen the scope of recruits, of candidates, and when you look at the numbers there in their explanation, the scale's mighty here. You can understand how you can do a lot more of these pre-recorded interviews rather than booking a room somewhere and interviewing people in person. So you can understand where the benefits will come from in this regard. It's making sure that that is a fair process. And what I'm not 100% sure is the response from the department does blame the end user candidate in most cases here, and then it talks about guidance. Well, I think we should see the guidance that was offered to each candidate for us then to walk ourselves through what it would have been like for someone being or about to be interviewed, and just to see if that guidance is actually fair and appropriate and informative enough. You imagine somebody has applied for a job. The time scale of that will not be in their gift, but they've booked a family holiday, and then they're getting their family on holiday, maybe 3 children, young children, and then all of a sudden they spend time out of their holiday to do this interview in their hotel room, and then they've guidance to read. Don't know how long the guidance is. Could it be 3 pages? Could it be 1 page? Could it be 20 pages? But then they go and do this interview, and then they find that at the very word go, nobody can hear them. It would be so frustrating, and that person could be the best recruit ever. So to me, whilst I can understand the advancement and the benefits that this process will bring, I just think with technology, there could be just so many pitfalls with it and create unfairness in the system.
Yeah, I think it's worth getting all that information. Jerry, you want
Just to add, I support all that, and if we can ask for a specific breakdown of the 427 candidates on whose end was the fault occurred, and also to say if members can zoom in to this committee internationally, then surely people can apply for a job internationally as well. So it's an obvious point, not saying people shouldn't be able to do it, but just to make it obvious.
Sure, if it's helpful.
Less than 755 miles away, we can zoom in.
Sure, if it's helpful, when those mass recruitments go out, the eligibility for candidature is as long as you're eligible to work in the UK and have the right paperwork. So I'm not sure how that necessitates.
Yeah, it doesn't seem. I can't see any particular legal reason that would prevent them doing it outside the jurisdiction. Okay, if people are, Deirdre, did you want to come in there? Were you coming? No.
Sorry, I was just going to say we'll discuss this. I know there was a briefing when Jill was in before the election. I think there was a few people who weren't dotted, obviously, with the election. So it would just be better to get a briefing, and then we can put all the queries or questions to them, just with answers then.
Well, why don't we get the written briefing first? Yeah, and then I'm more than happy to do an oral briefing too. I think that's that we can. But I think if they can answer it in one side of A4, we can then, because that'll save us doing the as and when we do an oral.
Well, if there's a timeline, then Matthew, you can cut off for questions, because even as we're talking through here, there's more questions being added. So just to make sure it's a full written briefing, then the answers as many questions as possible would be good.
That's fair.
Just a wee aside, I do note in the original letter, the complainant letter, that there was no feedback. There was absolutely no feedback to those candidates. Now, usually when you go through a recruitment process, even if you're unsuccessful, you can always ask for feedback. So where do they stand with regards to not giving anybody feedback with regards to the failure of an electronic system? It just seems strange to me.
Okay. We will reach out, and then we'll have a written and possibly an oral briefing afterwards. Grand. Okay. If people are happy enough, we'll also forward the responses to Daniel McCross and MLA who raised the initial query. Okay. The next question, the next item, relates to the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council and the Executive 24-25. This is a supplementary note. It's a technical. So the NI Fiscal Council has published a supplementary note to the NI Executive's 24-25 budget. Its paper outlines a technical exercise commissioned by the Treasury in 21-22, which moved leases from non-ring-fenced DEL to capital DEL. It's basically, insofar as I could see it, an accounting change which has a bit of a budgetary impact, but it's largely technical. People are content to note that. The next agenda item is the Joint Exchequer Committee. So page 171 of the meeting pack, the committee previously requested a written update each time JEC, Joint Exchequer Committee meetings, took place. However, the department has indicated that the JEC agenda, minutes and papers are confidential, which will restrict any potential briefing to the committee. However, a joint communique will issue after each meeting and be provided to the committee. Briefing will also be provided on any matters which do not brief the confidentiality of discussions. So that's really to note, but I think it would be helpful to know whether there have been any formal JEC meetings yet with the new British government. I presume this tomorrow's meeting is technically a JEC meeting, maybe not. It could just be might not be, but it would be helpful to know. Okay, people are happy enough with that. The next agenda item is 5.13, that is monthly outturn written briefings. During the consideration of the monthly outturn briefing on the 26th of June, members queried the presentation of the forecast outturn information. On the basis of that discussion, officials have committed to providing two versions of the monthly forecast table. One table to show the latest outturn and forecast outturn provided by departments, and another table to show the outturn and forecast outturn position provided by departments in the previous month. A third table will be provided which shows the variance between the current and previous month's forecast. This will highlight any changes between the two different positions. So, open to comments, but definitely go to the Deputy Chair first, who has been pursuing this one.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. And, you know, I welcome this progress on it, but I think that when we saw the ministerial statement coming through from DERA, it just highlighted the importance of this. So they obviously were looking for an advance on their funds due to running out of cash because you know, the budget bill has not yet been approved, and I would expect to see a number of those coming through in the weeks ahead. So whenever they come through, it causes a bit of confusion and alarm, especially for people who aren't that close to the finances.
No.
So I feel that either a comment along with those or something to add to this in terms of a profiled cash flow forecast as to whether this would have been expected at this point in time would be good to you know, underpin this monthly outturn versus forecast, because again, you know, as we're sitting here, we're not well, some people maybe are in DERA committee, but we're not scrutinising DERA as well. When that comes in, I don't know, as a finance committee member, was this expected due to the way the money is spent in DERA over the year, and it is just an administrative process, or has something happened in DERA to cause concern? I just use that as the example because that's the one that has come in to date. So I just feel like where people are planning their spend through the year. I know I've done that myself many times. You know, you're planning where your peaks of your cash out are, and if there's some way that we would know that when something's coming through, if that was expected, for example, in August and September. I know Deirdre Hargey had said before, from her experience with communities, she knew there's big, you know, peaks of where money was going out, but that's completely expected within communities.
Yeah.
It would be good for us to be able to see that on the finance side. So when we're seeing it, it gives us the opportunity for scrutiny as to this was a big cash flow burst that we expected in this particular month or quarter, or if it required further scrutiny, just because I feel we are at risk at the minute, just as we're running without a approved budget in place.
Well, I think it's also important, given we are often in a position where we are told about departments running out of cash. So the more we can educate ourselves on cash flow, the better. People are content. We can ask for that additional information. So we also requested detail on funding for Northern Ireland Protocol / Windsor Framework. It's indicated the outcome of the June monitoring round will be reflected on the public expenditure database in time for the July forecast, which is due from departments in August. This should see the forecast overspend in relation to anticipated funding being removed. So members, this is to note this update, unless anybody wishes to say anything further about it. Next agenda item relates to the Special EU Programme Board. If you go to page 177 of the pack, the committee previously discussed the SEUPB accounts for 2022 and 2023 and queried the delay in laying both of these. The 2022 accounts were laid on the 3rd of July and they were included in correspondence today and can be found on page 941, and the 2023 accounts are still being audited and certification is awaited before ministerial agreement is sought to lay before the Assembly. So that's to note, unless anybody wishes to make a comment. Go down.
Yeah, I had raised this, given that our departments and agencies, the majority of accounts with the financial year end of March 2024 have now been audited and laid. SEUPB accounts run to December 2023, and the fact that they've not been audited and laid, I would be keen just to make sure that we're doing our best as finance oversight to ask that we can get clarity that these will be certified as soon as possible, if not in this calendar year.
Chair, my understanding is they are currently with both CNAG, so the anticipation would be that that certification is nigh, if I can use that antique word.
Nah, you mean that in nigh
October. I mean, yeah,
not
that's what I mean.
not nigh in the Belfast sense.
Yeah, nigh with an I.
As in the end, it's nigh, not that's us nigh.
October. Let's call it October.
Right.
October.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next agenda item is Department of Finance follow-up information from the Head of Civil Service oral briefing. So at the hearing on the 26th of June, Hawks and senior officials briefed members. During the session, additional information was requested and has been provided as follows. We have seen details of the audit regime for NICS record keeping, which includes NICS record management and the NICS records management governance framework. And it is pretty long for those of you who are fans of this stuff. It's at page 178, 184 and 193 of the meeting pack. The NICS records retention and disposal policy, which outlines senior information risk owners and accounting officers' accountability and responsibilities. That's at page 224. The NICS mobile device security policy at page 237. Communication from Hawks to grade 2 in the civil service regarding NICS performance management arrangements. This includes high-level guidance in relation to NICS performance objectives, guidance on, quote, holding development discussions, a toolkit, and other associated performance management documents. That's starting at page 249 of the pack. Timescales for interaction between assembly committees and departments. That is of interest, and make sure we send that to others, is at page 411. That is, I think it's actually a standard document rather than a new one they provided to us. Details of work associated with the benchmarking exercise used to develop the new NICS pay strategy at page 180 of the meeting pack. Details of the NICS apprenticeship policy at page 181. Statistics up to the end of June 24 for NICS inward and outward secondments at page 182. Statistics up to the end of May 24 for unfilled vacancies across the Northern Ireland Civil Service, which is at page 183, and confirmation of the dates of June monitoring round announcements, which is at page 183 of the meeting pack. What interests me, and there are a couple of points. Number one, it says June monitoring round was commissioned on the 21st of May 2024, which I believe is relatively late for a June would appear to be relatively late for a June monitoring round. It was also, I think, the day before, coincidentally enough, the general election was called. So I think it would be helpful to find more information just to get about whether June monitoring rounds are generally commissioned that late, as in 10 days before the end of the month, given great play was made of the need and the routine nature of doing a June monitoring round in June in the circumstances. And also the other thing that occurs to me relates to the number of vacancies, which is 3,271. So that is, I think, certainly lots more. What is that? No, it's not 20. It's about 15%, for the sake of argument, between 10 and 20% of the entire Northern Ireland Civil Service, which is very large. I think it would be helpful to get that placed in an historic context. Whether that is dramatically higher, I mean, I assume it is dramatically higher than normal. It would seem having 10+%, carrying 10+% of permanent vacancies, but particularly in DFC. Now, obviously, DFC is a big operational wing because of it has job centres and benefits offices. But I think it would be helpful to have both those bits of information. Dan Forsyth, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And it was the unfilled vacancies piece that I wanted to speak to as well. I just would be keen looking at that. Obviously, the numbers are very high, in particular in departments like DFC, where there's a lot of processing. And we've seen it across different departments where they've been noting their vacancies as a saving in their accounts. So I was wondering if we should be looking at this to ask, centrally of the departments, what actions are they taking in terms of this? Are they reviewing provision of their services? Do they feel that certain critical services are at risk, and are they taking action? Or are they actually reviewing, different layouts off their posts and actually realising this is savings and moving on? I just feel like sitting there of 3,271 vacancies across the civil service. It's huge.
Yeah.
How real is it? And if it is genuinely real and not just for citation of a notional saving in your budget line, it's really, really serious, and there should be an action plan as to how services are critically addressed.
I think that's really true, and I also think I think it's worth us finding out whether if accounting officers are describing this as a pressure, or as a because I imagine it'll differ by different departments, but it would help to get a sense of what kind of work is going on to investigate
Impact on delivery.
Because if there are real impacts on delivery, we need to know. But equally, if there are areas where, so I think what would be most interesting is, first of all, the historic context about the level of, I like the raw number is probably less important than the percentage, but particularly where, as Diane said, if there are, some of these vacancies have been carried for years upon years, and the people who work in the relevant bits of the department have forgotten a time when there was when they had it may well be that the people are being overworked, and I think that is going to be a question too. But I do think it's important for us to get more context. Deirdre Hargey wants to come in.
Yeah, I think just as part of that, to get a fuller understanding, is the level or grade or the nature of the post. Is it a full-time post? Because part of the issue within DFC is the year-on-year contracts, so the temporary posts, because of the nature of the DWP contracts.
Yes.
So just to get a bit of depth to the vacancies as well, I think would be good.
That's really true, yeah, because those will be FTEs. They won't necessarily be individual human beings. They'll be just like a number which is calculated. It could be, and as Deirdre said, obviously lots of part-timers, in particular contract workers. Okay, Paul Frew.
Aside, in the old days, dodgy officers used to raise regiments that didn't exist in order to draw down money from the war cabinet. I'm not saying anything like that has happened here.
When you have said use those words out loud, Paul, so I presume you're not saying that, but obviously you've obviously, so we don't know any of that, but we'll ask the question in order to see what's happening. Yes, I will probably have to step out briefly in about 5 or 10 minutes, but thankfully the deputy chair is going to take the seat. The next agenda item is on engagement with UK financial institutions. From the UK financial services bodies and banks. That's at page 417. The committee had previously written to the Minister regarding policy intent and objectives relating to her engagement with the Treasury and regulatory authorities in respect of banking matters. In her response, the Minister has highlighted her role and focus when leading on behalf of the Executive, particularly during discussions with key stakeholders in the sector. The Minister has also highlighted that a new regulatory regime is due to be published by the FCA later this year. The Minister intends to engage with stakeholders in relation to implementation of the new regime and raise the issues with the Treasury or FCA. The Minister indicates that she intends to work with executive ministers on areas of commonality. So, first of all, members, I assume we would seek you will be agreed to get an update on that work. Can I say, I think I actually genuinely, sincerely welcome the fact that that the Minister is willing to work on this area, and I know other ministers are engaged. I think. To me, I am increasingly of the view, and maybe by implication ministers are too, that we have a bit of a blind spot in terms of policy making in relation to financial services, which has an impact both on our economic policy making in a kind of macro sense, but also in some of the questions we've been discussing around financial inclusion and access to cash and all of those things. We have a situation where banking is reserved. But our banking market, certainly our legacy banking market, i.e. the banks that are divesting from high streets, the brands that we know of, Bank of Ireland, Ulster, AIB, and that's not to lambast them as brands, but they are largely their consumer and personal banking and small business banking operations are almost entirely focused on Northern Ireland. Their UK operations, i.e. the bits that are regulated and governed from London, are entirely focused in this part of the world because in some cases they're legacy all-Ireland banks. What that means is I think there's not a huge amount of attention on them in policy terms. That's not to impugn them, but I just so happened to notice, for example, in the FT a little while ago, a few weeks ago, there was a news story about the regulators in London potentially reducing the amount that banks are obliged to cover in terms of fraud losses whenever someone's scammed. Basically, the current threshold is over £400,000. There is a proposal to move it down to 80,000. in any case, it appears that the statistics quoted in some of the media reports are that a couple of very prominent high street banks in Northern Ireland, banks that have basically no high street or consumer personal banking presence in GB, are the ones who have the worst statistics in terms of paying back consumers in terms of fraud. It reminded me that actually there is very little real serious political focus on the work of those banks. So I just wanted to make those points, and I think this is going to be really important for us, and I also think we should specifically think about an evidence session involving the local banks. But I think we need to do a bit of evidence gathering first, and the first step is getting an update on the department's work. I don't know if there is. I don't actually know whether departmental officials who are working this. I presume not, because the department's relatively stretched and they don't actually own financial services. So I presume it's the minister doing meetings, and probably the same with the economy minister. But I do think we should get more information. I also think we should do a bit of an information trawl in terms of the policy making landscape in terms of personal and small business banking in Northern Ireland, and see if the clerk is willing and able what the most recent work in this area. It may be that, for example, the NI Affairs Committee at Westminster has done something on it recently, but I just think it's something we need to dig into more. The Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and I would agree with your comments there. I think that just because banking is not a devolved matter, it's not something we should stay away from, because it's one of the big things that people are coming into our constituency offices about, because it's access to their money, it's access to their banks, it's people not comfortable using online banking, people who don't have ATMs in their towns and villages. It is a really important point of stress placed on many people, especially in our rural communities. So I would welcome any engagement by this committee in terms of this, and I do welcome the fact that the Minister has been meeting it, so I would support.
Deirdre, you want to go into it?
Yeah, no, just on the same thing, because it's this and obviously even wider issues around insurance and all of that. And I can see even in the correspondence, some of the councils have written into us on these issues and the impact on citizens here. So I would be keen. I know in our planning day we had discussed in terms of looking at finances more broadly, and even those that are reserved. But obviously, could we even write to the FCA or try and get clarity in terms of what they're going to be bringing later this year in terms of the scope of what they're looking at. And they still have a responsibility for oversight here. So is there the ability that when we're taking an evidence session, if that's something that we do in the future, that we invite the likes of them along to it as well?
I think that's a good idea, Deirdre, and I think both the FCA and indeed the PRA bit of the Bank of England, albeit that's a bit more macro, that's a bit more about the prudential side of banking regulation and less about the consumer side, so certainly the FCA. Jerry?
Yeah, I agree with points made in Dan's sort of areas that she emphasised, and just to make it more fruitful, I suppose, or to make it fruitful, if we could have a breakdown of what's reserved and what's devolved, because obviously there is an overlap, and I'm not quite sure in terms of banking what is reserved and what's
none of it is devolved.
None of it.
Basically, I think is the short answer is not. It's not devolved.
Nothing is. So if there's anything, I still think the conversation worth having, even if it is reserved. But if there's any scope where there's room for local legislation, that would be helpful.
I think the point is that it's there's different reasons why it's not devolved. But that questions about. It's not devolved, but it's obviously a fundamental driver of the economy, local, financial inclusion, impact on. So the Department of Communities, Department of Economy, Department of Finance, all have a vested huge interest in the functioning of the financial services sector here. And they have points of contact with financial services here. We do have, particularly in a legacy sense, a distinct banking sector to Britain, just because of the brands, and the legacy high street brands tend to be a bit different. So I think that's the key point. So people are happy enough. We will follow up with all those actions, and that will and this is obviously us following up on our strategic planning day. So we were planning on doing this.
We have some research coming through early next month that'll feed into this, but we can widen out and kind of bring back more information as has been discussed today.
Great. Okay. The next agenda item is is item 5.18, which is Ardell, Seedale, and FTC bids from the Executive Office.
517.
We didn't do 517, my apologies for that. I jumped on. The bit I skipped was the inquiry into fiscal intergovernmental relations, which is at page 421 of the meeting pack. The committee previously wrote to the Minister to ask about the dispute resolution process regarding funding for the Troubles Permanent Disablement Scheme. The Minister has indicated that she raised the issue with the new Chief Secretary to the Treasury and will pursue the matter in the time ahead. So if members are content with that, this is obviously an issue that has continued for some time. Hopefully it will be resolved in this new dispensation, but we will keep posted on that. The next agenda item is RDL, CDL and FTC bids from the Executive Office, which is at page 422 of the meeting pack. At the meeting on the 29th of May, the committee considered correspondence from the department regarding providing copies of the RDL, CDL and FTC bids from the Executive Office. Members agreed to seek an update and clarification from the Department of Finance on a number of issues, including the civil contingencies bunker, the role of the Chief Scientific Advisor and team, and central government transformation. The department has provided detail on the regional government headquarters, often referred to as the bunker, including historical and current ownership, as well as costs to maintain the bunker. Details also provided about the creation of a new scientific and technical advisor within TO and the bid for a new central delivery unit and its proposed functions. So that's to note this information. If anybody has any comment or question. The next agenda item is from the Fiscal Council, the interim fiscal framework for NI and comments on June monitoring. So members, that is at page 424 of the meeting pack. The Fiscal Council has written to the committee to provide, they wrote last month, to provide a commentary on what's covered by the interim fiscal framework, needs-based funding and the revised Barnett formula, impact in future years, stabilisation of NI's public finances, what remains to be agreed in the final fiscal framework. The Council has also provided a short summary of the main points from the June monitoring round published by the Department of Finance on the 1st of July. Members will have an opportunity to ask the Council for any further information during the scheduled briefing on the 2nd of October. That's actually a really useful summary from the Council's perspective of where we are. I think I might actually use this point to suggest that we bump up, given it's in the legislation programme, just to get an update from the Department on current plans or on Fiscal Council legislation. Hopefully that'll be, people are happy enough for that. So any other comments or questions? People are happy. The next agenda item is the Interim Transformation Board, which we have touched on already. This Hawks letter is marked official and sensitive. The committee had previously requested regular updates from the PTSB on its work. The chair is Jane Brady, so we requested updates detailing progress, reflections, and proposed next steps. We are getting an update on the 25th of September. So we have largely already covered the matters in this. The letter that you will find there, useful though it is, does not quite answer all the questions we have. So I think we still need, we have a set of outstanding actions from the previous agenda item. Okay, if members are content, we will move on. That is our.
This item's really quite a long one. Do you want to drop that, go to the briefing, and then you need to go?
Yes, I will. I will. We will move on now to the briefing, to agenda item 7. I'll have to pop out in one moment. This members is agenda item 7, which is the legislative provision for death and stillbirths. The oral briefing from the General Registrar's Office. It's also also agenda item 13, which is which we will have to discuss, which is the actual formal the order itself. So if people are content, Hansard will record this briefing. Members, at page 837 of the meeting pack and page 310 of the tabled pack are the papers in relation to this item. As members will recall, at the meeting on the 3rd of July, the committee heard the Permanent Secretary from her Permanent Secretary in relation to permanent legislative provisions to enable both telephone and electronic registration of deaths or stillbirths. and electronic transmission of documentation in these circumstances, members had expressed their disappointment at the delay in bringing forward the required legislation and requested that officials attend a committee meeting to bring full details of and timescale for the primary legislation required to make permanent legislative provision, as well as the technical reasons why secondary legislation was not a feasible option. However, the Chief Executive of NISRA and Registrar General was on leave and unable to attend the committee's last meeting before recess. In his absence, the Permanent Secretary answered members' questions. In advance of the meeting, GRO had indicated that it did not have the wording of the proposed primary legislation or a timetable for the passage of the required legislation, that both of these require more time. An update was therefore scheduled for today's meeting. The Department has provided detail on why the legislative provision could not be progressed via secondary legislation, and detail around the proposed primary legislation. So that is in quite exhaustive detail at page 839 of the meeting pack, the reasons why it is now considered, notwithstanding or despite what we were told previously, the initial enabling legislation does not allow what we were previously told. And it's also at page 839 of the meeting pack and at page 6 of the table pack. Members will wish to note that work to develop a bill timetable has progressed over the summer recess, with officials expect to be able to bring forward the draft bill by the end of this month for committee consideration. There has already been engagement with key stakeholders, the Department of Health, councils and undertakers. Final executive approval is required for the Minister to bring forward the bill. Until such time as the bill completes its legislative passage, a further extension order for the Coronavirus Act 2020 has been sought. Full details of that proposed statutory rule, though we have discussed versions of it in the past, are at page 49 of the tabled pack. So members, we have GRO officials here today to answer all members' questions, and I would expect we will have a few. So we'd welcome to the meeting Dr. Philip Wales, Registrar General at the Department of Finance, and Aoife Rooney, who is Deputy Registrar General. We will, I think, have a lot of the context. We will turn over to members. I will have to, unfortunately, for a few minutes now take my leave, but I will come back. So the Deputy Chair is going to step in my stead. But before I leave, I will invite members to ask questions. I might ask the first one, if that's okay. With the greatest possible respect to yourself, Dr. Wales, why wasn't this anomaly spotted first time around? Because we were assured that it would be possible to make this. We were assured that the previous legislation would enable us to make the change. Why did that mistake happen? And you'll apologise, you'll forgive me because I'm going to have to take my leave now, but I will read the answer unanswered and I'll be back in a few moments.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and good afternoon. It's good to be here to give the opportunity to provide you with an update. I had prepared some opening remarks, but I'm happy to set those aside, as I understand that the committee is running on a tight timetable. I mean, it was our understanding that we could make the changes that we needed to enact these pieces of legislation permanently. As the committee has just covered very quickly, these provisions have to do with the enacted in the Coronavirus Act. They adjusted and changed the way that we register deaths and stillbirths here in Northern Ireland, enabling registrations to take place remotely, which is to say that informants don't have to come to a registration office in person. And secondly, they enable the transfer of documents between parties to the registration process electronically, which is to say that rather than the family of the deceased bringing papers from the doctor to the registrar and then from the registrar to the undertaker, that those happen in the background. I mean, the reason we've come off our timetable and the reason that we haven't got the legislation as we committed previously is that there was a problem with our enabling powers. As the committee saw in the briefing that was provided to you on the 9th of August, this was an issue that was first raised and spotted by the drafter for these, who was externally engaged by the DSO. That question was asked and answered at the beginning of June, and answered in our favour that we could make the enabling powers, and then it was reopened at the end of June and settled against us. That is a matter of disappointment for me, for the team and for officials. It certainly wasn't our intent to mislead the committee. We provided the information we did previously in good faith. The fact that we were unable to is therefore a matter of our regret. What I would say is since that development on the 14th of June, we've worked extremely hard to try and remedy that situation. We've made considerable progress, as the briefing note sets out, on the primary legislation that we need to enact these powers. And on top of that, we've done a good deal of work in the background to produce the supporting documentation that would be needed for a bill of this nature. So while it's unfortunate that this has happened, and I think this is in the nature of things that we have to depend on legal advice and expertise to advise on, I think the way that we've responded in the period since then, in the 2 months and 29 days that we've had since that point, I think we've responded as quickly and as positively as we can.
Thank you very much. Whilst disappointing that we're facing extension of coronavirus legislation again from September through to March, I just wanted to ask, in terms of this new legislation, what is the anticipated timeline for it being able to be enacted?
So the briefing note sets out that the legislation, that the draft instructions were provided from GRO and DSO to OLC on the 28th of June. So we commenced the work on the legislation at that stage. The legislation, the draft bill has been through a number of iterations back and forth between ourselves and OLC, as is normal for a bill of this nature. GRO are not drafting it. That's not how it works with primary legislation. OLC lead on the drafting of all primary legislation. And so the timetable is determined very much by our capacity to specify instructions and to answer questions, and by OLC's capacity to take it forward. Right now we have a draft bill that we're just seeking authority from the executive to finalise with OLC. Indeed, the item was placed onto the agenda for the executive meeting Thursday gone. As we didn't get to that item on the agenda, we issued an urgent decision memo, so we have sought permission to finalise the bill from the executive. Once we've done that, we'll finalise the bill with OLC and then seek permission to introduce it, and it's at that stage that I expect the committee to see it. We're very keen for you to be able to scrutinise it and to provide whatever input you feel is appropriate.
No, thank you, because I feel like it's a good example of bringing forward legislation which is needed across a number of departments to put into place procedures that came into play under coronavirus regulations, which actually are really practically sensible. So whenever this is coming forward, so obviously like registration of deaths and stillbirths is not a new thing, it's the electronic registration of them that is new, and it'll be great to get that set up and in place here. Has there been consideration given to widening the scope of that in terms of whenever this comes into place, you're going to allow electronic registration of deaths and stillbirths for babies that are born after a point in pregnancy? Consideration to the wider point, which over in Westminster, my colleague Carla Lockhart MP has lobbied hard for the extension of the baby loss certificate scheme, and whereby the Westminster legislation may not be able to be extended to here. We very much have the buy-in of our Finance Minister and our Health Minister to put it in place. Is this a vehicle by which we can be strategic and sensible, joining the lot together and potentially putting this into place for the many parents who have lost babies and don't have a record of that here in Northern Ireland?
Well, I think that I'm very grateful for the question, because I think it's a really good one, and it's great to be able to test that here in committee. You're exactly right. There is kind of cross-party support around the baby loss certificate suggestion, and we're very keen in GRO to take it forward. It's been a priority for the minister since she was appointed. Hypothetically, it is absolutely possible that we could make statutory provision for a baby loss certificate through a legislative vehicle like this. We could put into the bill that we will have a baby loss certificate scheme, and like I say, it is a ministerial priority, and it has had widespread support. I think if we introduce those powers here, there's a sort of a balancing act. The parameters for the legislation that we have been preparing with OLC to date have been drawn very narrowly. They've been drawn narrowly around the specific provisions that are in the Coronavirus Act, which enable electronic communications and enable remote registration. So it's a very tightly defined legislative package, and our intent is to put our existing process onto a permanent footing, and that's been the extent of our work to date. If we, and I'm confident at this point, as confident as I can be, that we will have that done by the end of March, at the point when our hoped-for extension order comes to conclusion. If we reopen the scope of the bill and work with OLC to incorporate a baby loss certificate scheme, which everyone is in favour of, we can get the provisions for that, but it may introduce a threat to the timescales. So if we need to have a detailed, worked-up baby loss certificate scheme that goes into primary legislation, then that may take some time to spec through officials, and it may also take some degree of consultation. So I think it's a brilliant question. I suppose I would reflect it back to you as the timetable for this bill is very much determined by those Coronavirus Act extension orders. So my question back to you would be, this is something subject to a ministerial decision we could do, but it could threaten the timescale for delivery. So if you're happy to reopen the scope of the legislation, it's something we can look at. If the committee feels the imperative to get off the Coronavirus Act is the overriding thing, I think that would be informative to the ministerial decision about whether to widen the scope of the bill. I hope that makes sense. It's certainly something we can do.
No, thank you, and thanks for your considered response on it. I just wouldn't want to see there to be a missed opportunity where we have potential here to set up a vehicle whereby even to come as a second phase, this could be an opportunity to bring this into Northern Ireland if Westminster legislation cannot be extended here. But thanks very much. Paul Frew?
Yeah, just on that very question about baby loss certificates, you will have 6 months because of the very nature of the extension, 6 months extension from September 24th. So just to be clear then, you're saying that if you do insert a clause with regards to a baby loss certificate scheme or procedure, that could then delay beyond March, which means that you would then have to also apply for a further extension of the Coronavirus Act?
So I think it depends how you go about doing it. I think if we are required, before we put something into the bill, to specify the scheme, go out to consultation on it, run the consultation, respond to the consultation, and then offer the legislation, that although 6 months sounds a long period of time, that will disappear very, very quickly. So I think if it's the committee's interest and will that we should make provision for baby loss certificates in this bill, rather than bringing it through a separate legislative vehicle, which we could do also, that's something that we can take away and think about how we would deliver it. But I haven't come to talk specifically today about what we'll do on baby loss certificates, but I just want to flag to the committee that there are two objectives here. One is to get off the Coronavirus Act as quickly as is humanly possible, which I think there is broad-based consensus, and there's a second, which is to have a baby loss certificate scheme around which there is also consensus, but then there may be tension between those two objectives, and I absolutely welcome the input from the committee today on how we would resolve those.
It's a question I'm asking, I don't know myself, but would it be possible to put an enabling clause into the narrow legislation in order then that the work could be done after March on the baby loss certificate, but yet still have the varies to complete that work?
I think that's exactly the question that I asked of OLC yesterday. I think we have a draft answer, but I'm not absolutely certain, so I don't really want to mislead you. I think it's possible, but clearly we don't want to take a very broad power for ourselves through this legislation, which is a little bit at the end of what you're suggesting. If we just say GRO will develop a baby loss certificate scheme, that's quite a broad power, enabling us to define that appropriately. But is that appropriate? Well, to some extent, that's your decision to make. But in any case.
When the Permanent Secretary came to the committee in July, I had pushed him on the use of accelerated passage. He inclined to agree that he thought that it should go through accelerated passage because it was such a bespoke and universally supported cause, if you like, that the bill would actually do. I would still be of that mind myself with regards to that there would be very little fear or concern that I would have on my part to use accelerated passage in this way, given the circumstances, given the sensitive nature of the provisions, and given the fact that we've had extension after extension and we know exactly what this does. Are you minded to advise the Minister and the Department to go through accelerated passage also?
So I think the conversation that we've just had is material to that question. I think if the scope of the legislation remains tight and narrow, I think it's a possibility and it's on the table. I think if we widen it to include baby loss certificates, I would suggest it would be better that this place scrutinise it to the fullest extent. And clearly, accelerated passage is to enable us to pass urgently needed legislation, but it does limit the opportunity for scrutiny. So if baby loss certificates comes into scope, I think we would want not to take it through accelerated passage. On the narrow bill that's being prepared at present, we're very much focused on finalising that legislation right now to make sure it does what we intend. Given our experience at the end of the last session, we think it's imperative that we get it right rather than do it fast at this point. And I think the decision ultimately will be a ministerial one. The conversations that we've had on this matter have suggested that if the committee is satisfied with the legislation that we bring forward, there may not be a lot to gain from using accelerated passage, and that we may be as fast not using it as we would be taking it down that route. So I think for me, the most important objective here is to prepare the bill as specified at present, to try and get it in front of you for your scrutiny so that we can then work out what the appropriate next step is. I know that's not absolutely cast iron and specific, but that's as clear as we can be at this stage in the process, I think.
And there will be a clause, I would imagine, in this bill, no matter what provisions it brings in, other than the actual very tight coronavirus powers, that would actually end or guillotine the actual extension of the Coronavirus Act, no matter what part or extension we're in, whether it be beyond September or even beyond March.
That's exactly right. So the bill makes provision for the repealing of the Coronavirus Act extension order and for the commencement of the new bill. We're likely to do that by departmental order, so that we can. Very little is going to practically change under the Coronavirus Act between the Coronavirus Act extension order and the new proposed bill. But I think it's important that we are able to prepare the registration service as a whole and tell them what the statutory footing is for the service that they're dispensing. So if we make arrangement for commencement by order, we will be able to tell them definitively on this date the statutory basis will switch from being a Coronavirus Act extension order to being this new act. So you're exactly right. As soon as the new bill commences, the Coronavirus Act in relation to registrations of deaths and stillbirths will fall.
I want to ask you a question about the timeline that got us to here. It was around the 12th of June, according to the table, the chronological table, that the DSO discusses the proposed statutory rules with OLC. Agreement is reached that the enabling powers were not sufficient or are not sufficiently wide enough to cover this through secondary legislation. It was the drafter, I note in the wording, it was the drafter who first alerted. I think it was the 3rd of June. The issue was first alerted or first raised by the drafter with regards to the vagaries of the legislation. That was 3 weeks after they had been appointed. But the 12th of June date, where the DSO discusses it with the OLC, 12th of June, that was 11 and a half weeks after the GRO sought DSO advice and support to take forward the legislation. Does that time scale alarms me, and also the fact that on the 16th of April, when the DSO responds to the GRO on securing a drafter for legislative amendments to make the CA provisions permanent, they provided a list of possible drafters. So How does that process? What does that process look like? Are there drafters out there, for want of a better word, that's self-employed or that's floating about in ether, who then you can call upon? And are they experienced in certain fields, specialisms? Because I do note in one of those in some of that wording and phraseology, it talks about an appropriate drafter. So can you give me any sort of insight into that relationship between GRO, yourself and the DSO? How you come about selecting a drafter? How many were on that list? And how does that take 11 and a half weeks to basically cement your knowledge on the fact that we have took a wrong step?
So I can't speak directly to DSO process. I don't know whether IFA would have a contribution to make here. I mean, from our side, just to speak to the timeline that you talk about, I mean, you're quite right that it took a long time. I think what I'd say is the drafter, the name of the drafter here implies that they were writing the legislation. In practice, in this instance, work was going on the legislation in GRO in advance of the drafter being appointed. The drafter, if you like, looked at the draft that we had produced because it scales back the amount of time that you have to employ a specialist lawyer to look at these things. So work was going on in GRO over that period. It's not that work only commenced when the drafter was appointed. We were presented with a list of drafters, not myself directly, I should say, but and my understanding is they do have specialisms, and it's through that route that we ended up with somebody who we understood to have expertise and experience. I don't know, Aoife, have you got anything you want to add on this question?
Yeah, I mean, because drafting is such a specialist skills, there may be different numbers of drafters across different departments, and so when they come to DSO, I have come from DSO, so when they come to DSO, we will set about looking at the capability of the drafting being done in-house, and generally it is, but sometimes there is a need for external expertise, and there are external drafting consultants available.
Yeah, and I understand this isn't necessarily a GRO issue, and I'm asking you these questions of you because you're the ones that's basically suffered this misstep. I understand that there's players, there's different factions in play here. I suppose what I'm trying to get at and what I'm concerned about, because for me this has now moved off the provision and even the timescales to this point, because we are where we are and there's going to be a 6 months extension no matter what, and I understand the reasons for that. It's the capacity within the DSO that now concerns me. For other pieces of legislation that could be much bigger or greater scope, and maybe more sensitive and controversial provisions than what we are actually looking at here. So for me it's a bigger issue that I do believe in. I've used this phraseology with the Permanent Secretary, that this could well have been a canary in a cave scenario where we've maybe spotted something earlier we need to maybe pay attention to. Not necessarily GRO's problem, but it could well be DSO's problem. And of course the wider governance piece. So that's what alarms me more than anything here at this point. And whilst I have been applying pressure, as it's my job to do and my duty to do, this really does concern me. I think I'll leave it there. Chair, thank you.
Mind if I respond, Paul?
Sure,
Is that okay? I mean, I think they're good questions to ask, and I think DSO and OLC would need to answer those questions directly. We couldn't speak to them ourselves. I think on the GRO side, look, it's not a big team, and I think there are two elements here. On the one side, you need the expertise and the legal expertise to do the appropriate drafting. You also need departments to have the capacity to bring forward legislation or to bring forward instructions and then to answer questions. GRO is a 23-person team who, over the 3 months of the summer, June, July and August, issued more than 29,000 life events certificates, had more than 750 casework orders, had more than almost 200 people in the public search room, had 1,500 people come into the customer counter. We don't have a big team who are ready to do lots and lots of legislative work all of the time. We've talked about baby loss certificates here. We've talked about the extension orders. I think there is a reasonable question about capacity. I don't think it's peculiar to GRO. I think this is a wider issue, and I think that's certainly part of the picture here.
How have GRO's figures and establishment fluctuated over the years? So what was GRO's establishment 10 years ago?
So I don't have that information here in front of me.
Is it down?
That's my understanding, but I have to come back to you and correspond in that. I mean, over the last couple of years with the Assembly being away, I think there's been less need for us to have a standing team to look at legislative matters. So I think we are building back up in this area. It's something we need to look at.
That will not be GRO on its own. I would suspect there's agencies and government departments all over the place that have shrunk their legislative teams.
I can't speak to that, but it's certainly our experience, and I think given the volume of given the interest in the area, given the volume of work that we want to do, the things that we've talked about here today, we need to start to kit up a bit more in this area too. So I accept the premise that you're stating. It's something we're working on.
Okay, thank you, Jim.
Thank you to the Deputy Chair for stepping in for a few minutes. Jerry Carroll.
Thanks. I mean, obviously, the motive for this legislation is to take it out of emergency COVID legislation, but also to improve and make it easier a sort of difficult process for families and individuals. Is obviously my reading of it. Has there been any consideration either in this drafting and in light of some of the issues raised already, or generally in the day-to-day sort of workings of the office about how people whose English isn't their first language are supported in this process? Because I'd imagine that the last thing anybody would want to do in this situation where a stillbirth or a loss of a child would be to complicate or to misreport, if I want of a better word, sort of what happened. So it's just something that came to me just later your presentation, but I'm guessing there's probably terminologies that don't cross over from English to other languages. So again, if it's something that comes up as an issue in the day-to-day running of the services, or has it been considered in this legislation at all?
So we haven't considered it in the course of this legislation explicitly. We are in the process of drafting various equality impact assessments, so it may have been considered in that context. I mean, the legislation we're bringing forward here will enable more direct contact, or will enable the continuance of direct contact between a doctor and the registrar, and a registrar and an undertaker. And so, to some extent, that releases the pressure on the informants who might, as you say, may not have English as their first language. I think on the specifics of how we manage in the office, I think maybe I can come back to you in writing on this question. I'm sure it's an instance that arises.
I'd be keen. I mean, if it's not a major issue, then that's obviously good and in a terrible circumstance. But I can imagine it would be an issue, and like I said, you're aiming to simplify a difficult process, and you'd rather do it all at one time, for want of a better way of describing it. So I'd be keen if you can report back, have there been some issues? And
certainly happy to do that. I think in principle, not putting them in a position where they're given instructions by a doctor to take this piece of paper somewhere else and then to go from there to a third place would probably be helpful in that context, but we'll take away the action.
And just finally, Chair, to clarify the phone reporting process, isn't it? I mean, that's the family who lost a loved one is making that call. So presumably there has to be some, if not translation and support services, so people can not only emotionally talk about the tragedy, but to make sure what's being reported is reflected in the recording. If that makes sense.
We'll take that question away and come back to you, Jerry.
Thanks. Good.
Okay. If there are no further questions, thank you to members, and thank you to Philip Wales and Aoife for coming in to brief us. Members, obviously I had to pop out for part of the conversation, and there was a conversation about the potential inclusion of baby loss certificates. I suspect we'll have to maybe take that and have a further conversation about that, about the practicality and whether the department feels willing to look at broadening the scope of the bill or the practicalities of that. But I understand that's come up and there's been extensive. So we may take that forward, that conversation. But the matter at hand is extending the current statutory rule, notwithstanding the sort of in principle frustration with it as a vehicle. But if members are content with the proposed statutory rule and to extend the expiry to the temporary provisions in relation to death and stillbirth registration, or if anybody wishes to make any further comment. Okay, so thank you both. Well, yeah, they are. Yeah, they're there.
Yes.
So
I'm just going to check, Chair. Do we have the other officials? Yes. Do you want to just go into that, or do you want to go back to the SL one, because it's quite a long way? Do you want to do it?
The SR1, yeah. I think we might just, while record, go and do the SR1, which is
SR1. It is item 6, Chair, page 20.
Okay, so page 20. Okay, folks. So now. So I'm just going to go through the SR1 to get out of the way. So if we will, it's at page 441 of the meeting pack. As I said, and as we've discussed, we are going to do this this is the SL we're doing first.
The SL one that we missed out to go to the briefing, Chair.
Yes. Okay. Sorry. Apologies.
Item 6 on the agenda.
Apologies, everyone. We're going back to an SL which is on building amendment regulations, and we discussed this before the break, and this is before our next evidence session. So at the meeting on the 3rd of July, departmental officials briefed members on the Department of Finance's responsibilities and work in relation to building regulations, including energy efficiency, post-Grenfell safety measures and disabled access for public buildings. The briefing also covered a proposed SL1 to amend the current building regulations and introduce new fire safety proposals. The papers were previously provided for that meeting and they have been replicated in this week's pack. At that time, members discussed a number of issues, including the wider review of departmental responsibilities in relation to building regulations and control, implications of the Grenfell inquiry report, and obviously people will have seen since then the final report came out this week, cost and benefit analysis of the proposed fire safety proposals and departmental solicitor's office comments on the proposed statutory rule. The committee agreed to request a diagram setting out the functions of both the Department of Finance and the Department of Communities with regard to building regulations, a list of current Northern Ireland building regulations, advisory committee members, as well as details of any plans to fill any vacancies and information on the working group on building safety, their terms of reference, scope and current work and objectives, and any information on predecessor groups. The response from the department starts at page 823 of the meeting pack. The committee agreed that it would require further information before agreeing that it was content with the SL1. This included confirmation that DSO were content with the SL1 as currently drafted, and clarity from the department on the timescale and urgency for the implementation of this proposed amendment. DSO has advised that it is content that the draft statutory rule is within the department's power and is in the proper form. The DSO also noted that the draft addresses minor grammatical and formatting issues. The department also indicated that it would be preferable if the SL1 was progressed before September to allow the team to focus on any implications from the findings of the Grenfell inquiry. The response addressing points in relation to the SL1 can be found at page 828 of the meeting pack. The department's suggestion was for the committee to consider this via correspondence over the summer. However, it is not good practice to consider legislation that way, so we're doing it now. So, members, if we are content with the responses received regarding the SL1 and the policy proposal it represents, then we'll move on to the statutory rule. So I will ask the question: if members are now content, the committee proceeds with consideration of the proposed statutory rule to amend the building regulations NI 2012, NI regulations 2012, the building regulations NI 2012 to introduce new fire safety proposals, or if they require any further information or wish to make any comment? Agreed? Okay. So we'll also seek your agreement to get a further update on further findings of, and the implications for here, for Northern Ireland, for the Grenfell inquiry now they've been published. It may also be useful for this update to address the work of the task and finish group, as well as the options agreed upon by ministers. Okay, people are content with that. Grand. Now we will go back to where we were before, which is our oral briefing for the Department of on the rates consultation. So members, page 860, of the meeting pack, you will find in pages 12 to 37 of the table pack, Sharon, you will find papers relating to this pack. The clerk's memos at page 860 and at page 862 of the meeting pack are papers previously provided when the committee received a briefing on the issue in June. Starting at page 12 of the table pack, there is a revised clerk's memo and there's a revised clerk's memo and briefing paper provided by the department. And yes, we also do need to agree that Hansard are going to record it. I presume people are agreed to that. And we're going to welcome the meeting Sharon McGee, who is Deputy Secretary and Interim Head of LPS. Welcome, Sharon. And also Andrew McAvoy, who's Director of Rating Policy. They've been lucky or unfortunate enough to have to be in front of the committee a few times since you've returned. I'm sure they look forward to it with glee. I'm sure the entire summer they were...
It's nice to see you all.
Yeah, so the entire summer you were sort of dying to get the good weather and not so much good weather here, but holidays and out of the way.
Yeah, it does mean it's autumn. We're back.
It does, yes. And our committee is usually associated with things like bad weather and things, unfortunate things to have to look forward to. So they're going to provide us, Sharon and Andrew are going to provide us with briefing on rating policy matters, including the next steps following the consultation on non-domestic and domestic rating measures. Includes the consultation responses, which were so ultra sensitive that we had to talk about them in a closed session. And I hasten to add, because of LPS. Members will wish to note that the content of the consultation report does not differ from the original one that was provided to us in June. It is indicated that the Minister will now be bringing forward short, medium and long-term rating policy proposals, including a more strategic policy approach in the coming weeks. Do we know that from the department?
Yes. We anticipate that.
And is that part of the budget sustainability work?
That was also what the Minister said yesterday as well, that that was the process we were following and we were in train with that.
Okay. So we may be getting more detail on all of this and the enacting of these policies by the end of September then. As part of this process, the Minister will be engaging with with executive colleagues on these next steps and will continue engagement with business bodies, organisations and other stakeholders. So once these matters have been considered by the executive, officials will be available to the committee in relation to policy proposals and to advise on the analysis and policy considerations underpinning this approach. So we would invite the officials to make a brief opening statement on the context, and then we'll...
Enough for me to...
Yeah, you go ahead.
So I'll keep this brief, Chair, but basically work what we've done to date in terms of the rating system since the return of the executive, February 24. Obviously, Minister returned and we had the immediate priorities of the rate setting, which took place in March, and then implemented the rate support schemes through the Small Business Rate Relief Scheme, Back in Business and the Rural ATM Scheme. Two of those had lapsed in the absence of an executive. In parallel to that then, we were obviously closing off the specific consultation process in relation to revenue raising. That ran from the 7th of November 23 to the 13th of February 24. And the Minister had then, whenever that closed in February, she wanted to undertake supplementary engagement with stakeholders, and she wanted to do full justice to the over 1,400 responses that were made to the consultation exercise. The report was finalised early June. Copies were issued to the committee and executive colleagues under embargo, and we provided a closed session briefing on the 12th of June to the committee. What we had said at that stage was we were asked would we come back then following summer recess to provide sort of follow-up session in public session, and that's why we're here today. In terms of next step, Chair, you're right. Executive agreement now will be needed on the Minister's proposals that will be being brought forward. Last month we met with the Minister and she had outlined her policy position that she wanted to be reflected in the executive paper, and we'll be working on that now for the next few weeks just to finalise that off. In parallel with that process then, we'll also have our business as usual statutory rules that we bring through for the annual turn of year rating legislation. So that's the twin track of work over the course of the autumn, and then those two pieces of work will probably dovetail around January time as we start to bring new legislation through the Assembly again, which we've been through for some of that last year. So we'll be back onto that cycle again come January. So
the legislation meaning sort of the update and like all the SL1s and stuff to update the
just the annual. So would be regional rate back to business, small business rate relief. So as part of that process, then some of the stuff that might be coming out of the executive process can filter into that and run alongside that sort of programme of legislation at that time for the shorter term measures.
Okay, that's really helpful. Thank
so
you.
That's where we are.
Right. Well, that's useful and usefully concise. Can I just ask a few bits? So I'm understanding correctly that you are, and I appreciate there may be limits on what you can say in some of this, but you are currently providing advice to the Minister on the technical options for certain bits of revenue raising that you could do using the rate system and the evidence. This is part of the evidence base.
Yeah, it's not necessarily all revenue raising either. It's just looking at the rating changes that can be made for the rating changes that we would put to the executive over the next few weeks. Yeah.
And is the idea that it would be is your understanding that it would be included in the budget sustainability plan?
The Minister will be considering the two in tandem. From our point of view, we're providing the evidence and the analysis purely on the rating system. And that will be going to the executive in isolation as well.
So from your perspective, it's a decision to you don't make the decision. What you're telling me is you don't know or make the decision as to whether it's in the budget sustainability plan, but you are providing advice that it should be ready, that it will be ready should it be required to be included.
The Minister had asked us. She wanted to know more about the whole rating system. There's a lot there. There's a lot of reliefs. There's a lot of policies, and she wanted to understand all of that. A lot of it's very contentious, as you know, from the consultation responses as well. So we've spent quite a lot of time going through all of the rating policies and everything that's available in Northern Ireland.
Beyond the stuff that's in
we've looked at everything. We would look at that anyway as part of the rating policy work that LPS does, mostly to see that the policy is delivering what was intended. Is it supporting the people that it was meant for? So we would review all that stuff quite regularly anyway. So that's been part of the work that we've been doing this last number of months. But the Minister then wanted short, medium and long-term policy proposals that she could take to the executive. So what we're doing at the moment is producing the facts and figures behind that, the legislation that would be involved, the time frames that would be involved, and then she'll make a decision on which ones she wants to take forward.
Currently you are providing advice on, and I'm just putting words, I'm not putting the words in your mouth to say, it's just to give an example. If you end X relief, X, Y and Z reliefs or taper them, you will raise 10, 15, 20 million pounds, or theoretically suppose you could be more generous in certain reliefs and it would require this legislative device, and therefore it would you could have to do this by this date in order to realise such and such savings in the next financial year.
Taking that analysis to the next level, though, in terms of actually formulating a package of proposals, then.
What does that mean? Does that mean you providing more sophisticated advice in terms of which would be more achievable or desirable?
Policy that in terms of the suite of policies that would be implemented. Obviously, there's things that you can do through subordinate legislation. There's things that would require primary legislation. So it's putting that in sequencing that in the right way, so that a sort of suite of policies can be brought forward again over the short, medium, long term.
And have you been asked to do any work in terms of looking at the economic impact? So, for example, just to pick one at random, industrial derating is an example where you might say, some people say that there might be theoretically some dead weight in terms of the I don't know, I'm not saying that, but that might be an argument. Maybe. On the other hand, some might say, well, if we're trying to attract manufacturers to our dual market access, this is a good calling card to have, particularly if you've got a lower corporation tax rate.
What I would say
are you giving that context?
Yeah, and we're going beyond the specific confines of, obviously we were, with the revenue raising consultation, it looked at specific policies, but it was basically just, do we keep it or do we remove it? The advice that we're giving to the Minister and stuff that will be going to the Executive will be on a much more nuanced approach to the policy. It won't just be literally, the options won't be limited to keep or get rid of.
You would expect that, but have you been asked to come up with a number? Have you been asked to hit a number?
No. And a lot of what you said about the economic impacts, we got that in the consultation responses. Some of the responses were very detailed and they set out exactly what would happen if you did away with this relief or if you improved that relief. So we were aware of that from very early on, but no, we haven't been asked to hit a number.
Okay, just before I will bring in others, there'll be obviously a few questions. Just in relation to what the consultation responses themselves, there seems to be the ratio seems to be not exactly the same, but effectively, give or take between 500 and 1,000 responses to most, and kind of 3 or 4 to 1 in favour of retaining. Is that simply a product of the fact that you are more motivated to respond to if you are a trade body or a business that directly benefits from the
Yeah, that's typical. Yeah, I mean, we've seen that before. You're more likely to respond, and the weighting of the responses is coming out in favour of retention. Because of that.
But that is also how you get the good economic analysis then too, because those people go to the trouble of setting out the case for retaining it, and we wouldn't get that otherwise without running those consultations. That's why it was worth doing, just to get.
But when they said the economic case, if you're how much, if I'm not again picking out like the freight relief, if a haulier writes you and say, well, I will disinvest fully, but I will have to curtail certain activities and therefore reduce my workforce, for example. Do you take that at face value, or do you dive into it a bit more? Or
we'll be doing supplementary analysis on top of that. But the fact is, it is useful, as Sharon says, for the likes of the example that you gave there, they even to get the point across quite succinctly that if you were to remove that freight transport relief, what was put across quite clearly was that there would be a pass-through cost to the consumers.
Okay. So just so much before bringing others, then you're working to enable this to be part of the budget sustainability plan at the end of this month. Should the Minister decide to do that and the Executive agree to it, you're not saying that that's definitely going to happen, but
it will contribute towards.
It will contribute towards that. Okay, number one. Number two, there's no number or target you're working towards, but I presume you'll offer a range of, like, maximally, theoretically, you could remove all of it. I doubt that'll happen, but you could remove every single relief and raise a certain amount of money, or you could just leave it untouched.
Yeah, I mean, everything's scalable. So
I presume you haven't asked to look at any more generous reliefs, or have you?
Yeah, but been asked to look at everything,
yeah.
All of the reliefs. What would it cost if you enhanced that relief? What if you gave more help here, there, whatever? What would it cost? How would you pay for that? So yeah, we do all of that analysis, but
and we have
then we hand it over.
We've had engagement with stakeholders who are expressly requesting more relief out of the system. So you
would imagine that too.
But as part of the advice that we're providing to the Minister, we're then saying, look, these people raise these points as part of the stakeholder engagement, and here's the advice, here's the cost, and that's being provided to her as well.
Okay. Vice Chair.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks Sharon and Andrew for being back with us again. So this consultation that's been published, obviously it was directed by the Secretary of State on very specific terms, but subsequently the Minister, as you say, is looking at the entire system. So I was just wondering, she talked about having short, medium and longer term responses and actions going forward. On the back of this consultation, is there plans for short-term actions based on this consultation?
Well, she has, as I say, we've reviewed all of the policies, we've reviewed everything that was part of the consultation, and we've costed up what would happen if you removed them, if you phased them out, if you enhanced them. we've presented all of that to the Minister. So she's looking now, she also asked us how quickly could you do these? What could be brought in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, further down the line? So we've provided all of that.
And the other point just that I was going to mention was that it's for the executive to decide on the final package. So you know, it's the Minister will be writing to the executive, obviously outlining what her proposals are. We'll be implementing the executive decision then in relation to them.
The Finance Minister in the Chamber yesterday and in the press today, you know, was confirming plans of changes to rates that will likely increase the rates bills on households and businesses. So, unsurprisingly, that's caused a lot of reaction. A lot of people getting in touch with, you know, our elected reps, and a lot of people are very concerned what this actually means for them. So, I was just wondering, in terms of the homes and businesses that are very concerned at what this means for them, what would be the time frame if there were to be something brought forward and agreed from Finance Minister through the executive? Would this be hitting their bills in March 2025, a significant change, or what are we looking at here?
Legislation could be passed to enable that time frame, but again, it would be for the executive to decide on the timing and when these things come into operation.
Yeah.
I would say though that in relation to some of the coverage over the last few days, I mean, this is what we were conscious of would happen as soon as that report was published. Yeah. There's a bit of a conflation with the consultation report and what people have said in that report. That's not the department saying that, that's the stakeholders that have responded. And likewise, some of the, maybe half of the reporting has been on what that says, and the other half on what the Secretary of State put out as original proposals. So as I say, as I outlined earlier, the Minister's moving beyond just those binary sort of options that were looked at by the Secretary of State.
Yeah, we were quite surprised by the press coverage. You know, they're talking about removing the cap. We haven't said that. The Minister hasn't said that. That's the executive hasn't said that. But it was in the press last night, so I don't really know where that came from.
Is the 400k?
Yeah, I mean that was in the consultation. So what was in the press was near enough lifted from the consultation document, but that has not been announced by anyone.
That's a decision for the executive.
That's for the executive to decide that.
These are all controversial and cross-cutting.
But premature.
Absolutely, and I just wanted to ask, so again, another concern representing South Down rural constituency. I was wondering, in terms of this review of everything to do with the system, is there like an equality impact assessment going hand in hand with that? I would be very concerned with rural disparity and people with, you know, isolated rural homes being hit significantly worse.
Any policy change has to have that. We do rural impact, equality impact, and we do the sort of data protection side of things as well as this Section 75 stuff. Yeah.
No, that's good to know. And it's just, as I say, it's the media reaction to this, it's the things that are being put out as if this is happening, and the feeling that this is happening now. People are very concerned, how am I going to afford this for my household? And business who are already under extreme pressure and are closing the doors, feeling the pressure of online businesses and what that means for them. They appreciate the back in business scheme, but obviously, you know, it doesn't last for that long. So just understandable, strong reaction to this, and communication is really, really key. So I thank you for clarifying a few of those points today.
As I say, we were aware that inevitably that would happen just because of the nature of the original proposals. So I mean, the reporting of it has really just picked up where it left off with when the Secretary of State published when the department published his proposals, you know. So unsurprising, I think.
Okay, Paul Frew.
Yeah, thank you for the this presentation, because it has helped to clarify a lot of things, and hopefully the media are listening with regards to this. Even if you were to, and I know it's not the binary, you've already clarified it's not the binary, but if you were to remove all of the reliefs, you still ain't hitting 133 million, which the government has tasked the executive to find with regards to the sustainability plan.
We need to find 130. There's already found a good chunk of the 50. It's 50 or 60. Just
the regional rate increase this year raised an extra 31 million, so that's every year.
Oh, so that's
forward.
Part of it then?
Yeah. So that's part of that 113.
Recurring.
Right, okay.
But 50 or 60, I think.
It's more like 80.
Right, so with 50
the regional rate, I think, was 31 million.
Yeah.
Out of the 113.
Right, okay. Thank you for that. I'd forgot about that, Chair. Thank you. It's fair to say that even though you're not looking at this in a binary, remove or keep in, retain these reliefs, the actual fact that you could add in another tier of grading, or move a cap either up or down, will cost money. So, with regards to even process, so is that part of your
administration and IT costs? Yeah, I mean that is. I mean, in the first instance, what we'll try to do is policy that fits within parameter changes for the IT system, so that it's not incurring a huge admin cost. And then we'll also look at options beyond that. But there's lead-in times for these things with IT changes and things like that. So in the first instance, parameter changes are all that can be done within a short space of time. But we can look at things beyond that as well.
And it's fair to say that it's just, while you have a principle of a cap for whatever, whether it be size or scale or cost or value, the fact that you raise or lower that cap will still cost money, because you are having then to process and identify people who then, the differential.
Well, we already have all.
We know
we would know all the properties. They're already valued in terms of.
Right, okay.
Just set at the cap.
That wouldn't be a prohibitive cost.
No.
Right, okay.
Yeah, we'd be able to do that easy enough.
Yeah. So I suppose what I'm asking is, how flexible can the flexible system be without costing us too much money? So
well, there's inevitably IT changes, and anything we do now, there's an IT change, there's a cost to that, but these aren't prohibitive costs, as I say. Some of them are just, as Andrew says, moving the parameter, so instead of a 4%, it's a 2%. And that's not just as simple as going into the code and changing 4 to 2, ta-da. There's a bit more to it than that, but it's not something that takes months of development and testing, and as it would be with a new system. We're just changing the parameters of the reliefs within the system we've already got the ratepayers' details. We know who gets reliefs and how much they get. That's already built into the bills automatically. So it would be a matter of our IT team amending how that's calculated. So all doable, some of it a bit more complicated than others, but none of it to a degree that would inhibit us from trying to move forward with any of these proposals that the executive signs up to and agrees to.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Jerry Cara.
Thanks. I want to dig into the industrial D rating. So the document says there's 4,500 properties who avail of it, and I think 70% of those are in manufacturing. I mean, obviously, given the scale of the sort of small businesses within our society here, yeah, I'm just maybe curious if you can speak to those organisations who do avail of it. I mean, we're aware of some of the bigger corporations who get it, you know, who are definitely at small businesses and are getting half a million around that figure, which is very, very concerning. And your average benefit, I noted, is £15,000. Obviously, taking in the higher figure and the larger, smaller companies. So, can you maybe talk about those smaller manufacturing firms? Are they 1, 2, 3 people employed, or best as you know, what kind of organisations are they?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I mean, I'll double check these figures for you. But I think there's around 2,600 of the recipients in that 4,500 have an NAV of under £15,000, so that's below the small business rate relief threshold. So
they have what underneath that? Sorry,
they have a NAV, their property value.
Okay.
So you know that they are classed as small business hired admits. So from that point of view, you know, a lot of the relief money does actually go to small businesses. Now, some of those small businesses will have a handful of people operating them, but they may also occupy quite large premises. Mm-hmm. But they can also operate out of industrial units and smaller.
Yeah. So the £15,000 NAV is a threshold that we use a lot. So that's your small business rate relief threshold. So that's a good indicator of the size of a building. Anything below £15,000 rateable value is a small building. A workshop could be this size, the NAV could be 4,000, 5,000, something like that. Big workshop in an industrial estate, as far as the eye can see, the NAV could be £500,000. So, you know, to give you some idea of scale there. So a £15,000 NAV generally means small premises. That's why small business rate relief is awarded to them. So more than half of the companies that get D rating are in small premises.
So, and I mean, even the larger ones are still, then they're significant employers. So, you know, it's...
We don't keep metrics on the number of employees only on the size of the building.
But the manufacturing sector as a whole employs around 89,000 people in Northern Ireland. When you're talking about the smaller businesses, whenever we were out, we met. I went out to Cookstown to speak to. There was 110 manufacturers there at one of the consultation events that Manufacturing and I had set up, and when I was there, one of the fellas came up to me and said, "Look, would you come out and have a look at the factory? We'll show you what goes on here." This was around at Montgomery Road, and he was a very small employer in terms of the amount of people that were employed in the place, but he was occupying 2 or 3 units with massive amounts of machinery to do like lighting cables and things like that, you know. So he was trying to sort of stress to us the importance of, if this was removed, the size of a bill he would have in comparison. So and Stephen Kelly's articulated that argument well in terms of the sector. Obviously we have to balance that up with the revenue raising side of things.
Well, as I say, Jerry, we don't have the metrics on the number of employees, but we do have an idea of the total number of people involved in the manufacturing sector. But from my many years as a valuer, I was the person who went out to assess whether derating was warranted or not. And I was in many premises where there was 2 guys working there, and they were making staircases, or a wee workshop unit where there was 3 women and they were making coleslaw for hotels, something like that. They all get industrial derating. It doesn't matter what size your premises are. If you comply with the legislation, you're entitled to the relief. And the legislation says you have to be operating as a factory. And that means you have to be altering something, turn it into something else, and it has to be manual. So it's not creative, it's not computers, it's not recording artists, and that you have to make something.
I appreciate it.
Everybody who complies
I think
gets
obviously,
the derating.
yeah, I think you go back to manufacturing, and I mean obviously like Turkey's sort of going for an early Christmas comes to mind. They're obviously going to support, and I think you make the point about sort of small factories, and no problem with that. But I think the fact that you have Caterpillar getting almost £300,000 a year handout, and people's rates are going up, and other companies getting large numbers of money. I mean, that frankly, it's I'm not saying you have to, but it's indefensible.
When industrial derating was brought in, it was to bring industry into Belfast. It was for the shipworks, the rope works, the tobacco factories. It was for them. It was for big industry.
Well, I think it hasn't worked given the fact that a lot of those industries have left or looking to leave, and you don't have to comment on that. But I think it's a calculation that, you know, trickle down economics and operating economics in the interest of corporations works, and it doesn't. But you don't have to agree or disagree with that. Just another point on a separate issue, the cap on rates, obviously, given what was mentioned. And obviously in the consultation response, there's some individuals talking about asset rich and income poor. Has the department or the Secretary of State done any research into those individuals? How many of those several thousand homes who would be affected by the cap being lifted, or potentially, you know, come to poverty or?
So what we've done is we've looked, in my team, we've looked at every single recipient of the cap at the moment, and we have analysed it against which properties or which repairs are in receipt of disabled persons allowance, lone pensioner allowance, low income rate relief, housing benefit, rate rebate schemes, so that we know exactly how many in which category, because it's the only information that we really have that we can rely on and base decisions on. For example, you'll hear the argument anecdotally put, well, it's you know, an older woman lives in that house on her own, how she's supposed. So we will know that, so that the decision that we're taking is informed by that.
Can we get that information shared to the committee?
I don't see why not. You know.
Okay.
I think.
what would be the reason why not? You know?
I know we just haven't been asked for it before.
Okay. Well, I think it'll need to go to the executive first, but yeah, I think we could.
I think the committee should be.
Well, I mean,
it wouldn't be personal
None
information
of the
on any
decisions
of
will be
it.
taken on
Numbers.
Numbers, percentages on benefits, and if the breakdown of those benefits.
It was one of the things that we were genuinely concerned about, you know, the asset rich, income poor. So we were able to overlay then the reliefs that we administer on top of those properties that get the cap, and then we were able to map that and show where they are and how many they are. So yeah.
I'd like to request that, Chair. Thank you.
Okie dokie.
Yeah, well, I think we'll have a few bits of requests of information that we will that we will comply with. Owen Dennison.
Thank you, Chair. Just following up firstly on a couple of Jerry's questions. So, in relation to industrial derating, has there been any consideration of potential implications arising out of state aid rules of changing that, and are there any barriers to changing that as a result?
Yeah, I mean, the barriers to changing it are you can't say you want to take the current industrial derating provision and say, I'm only going to target that to manufacturers who invest in like skills initiatives or research and development, or, you know, who make decarbonisation commitments. You probably would be, you're able to lower the level of support. You may be able to cap the level of support in terms of like NEV thresholds and things like that. But again, it's difficult in a space-intensive sector. But and the basic answer with it is you can roll back from the support that you're given at the moment, but you can't refine it or target it in any way, because it's a pre-accession aid. It was in place before the UK joined the EU as a member state, and we're allowed to have it under the subsidy controls as a result of that. But if we're to target it or change it in any way, then it has to comply fully with the current subsidy regulations.
So is it fair to say then, on the basis of that there's a high risk involved with change, because if there's an adverse economic consequence, it's very difficult to roll back?
You couldn't roll back.
Okay, I know that's helpful. And in terms of the advice and the analysis that's provided to the Minister, has there been any cross-departmental input into that? So, for example, on issues like industrial derating, has economy been involved in terms of things like the Landlords Alliance? Has communities had any input at this stage?
No.
When it goes to the executive, that's
well, at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, no problem at all. And then just again, Jerry had a question around the asset rich and income poor question, around the max value cap. Are there any mitigations that are under consideration at this stage, if there was to be a change, that you would think would be appropriate or feasible?
There are already mitigations in the system, because there's means tested support within the system that won't change, because you get that's dictated by your rates liability. So if your rates liability goes up, the calculations reassessed. So it's almost built into the system. The system was designed actually to originally operate without a cap.
Yeah.
And the cap was put in 2007 by the then Secretary of State, Peter Hain, in anticipation of the executive coming back. It was 500,000 at that point. But the system was designed to come in with no cap whatsoever.
No, that's helpful, because it's an argument that's often raised, but people can't usually point to an example of an individual in circumstances that wouldn't necessarily be impacted in that way. In terms then of the reliefs under consideration, are there any at this stage that have been ruled out in terms of change?
We've just put through a whole suite of options, costs, analysis, legislation for everything, so that'll be for the Minister to decide what goes to the executive. We couldn't say what she has decided yet.
Perfectly understandable, no problem. Just one final question from me, Chair, and Andrew, it's picking up on something that you said around this would be significant and cross-cutting, and any decision would have to go to the executive.
Yeah.
Is that true of any change? So I'm thinking, even if it was something around a small change to the maximum capital value, would that still be deemed significant cross-cutting just because it's a change to rating policy?
That's significant cross-cutting. Yeah.
Okay.
The Minister can't make a decision on that in isolation. That's the sort of precedent that's been set. Now, if you were talking about a minor change, maybe to something like small business rate relief, or something that's very much within her portfolio to refine something, or a minor change like that, I don't think that would maybe necessarily warrant going to the executive. That can be done through negative resolution SR. But for starters, the maximum cap change requires a debate in the Assembly. So by its very nature, it would fall within that.
That's primary legislation, isn't it?
No, it's subordinate legislation. Yeah.
The cap?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
No, go ahead. That's me finished, Chair. Thank you.
The significant cross-cutting test is one that's not done by officials. It's sort of you're operating that judgment based on precedent, or
I mean, even for example, for setting a regional rate, it needs to go to cross-community vote.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
So it's because it's taxation.
It's because I suppose it's theoretically, what you're saying is theoretically she the finance minister could do it, but it would be very easily challenged in court.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, that is extremely helpful. Just again in relation to industrial derating. So you talked about looking at all this in a more nuanced way, and obviously Jerry had asked us specific questions about certain sizes of businesses accessing it and his particular views on that. How difficult would it be theoretically for LPS to, for example, operate a test based on turnover? Would that be possible, or would it be more likely to be, is any of that legally possible, or is it possible?
If you implemented a test on turnover, it would fundamentally change the scheme to the extent
Rating system, because it would change
bring it into the new subsidy rules. Yeah,
and because it wouldn't be a property. It wouldn't just be a property tax. Then it would be a property tax.
Be an income tax.
Weighted by income. Yeah. It will still be a property tax on those who paid it, but the threshold would be an income one.
The basis of valuation in the rates order is a rental value. So if you were going to start taxing people,
it would be a rental. It would be a rental threshold.
It would create a difficult taxation. It would be sort of conflicting taxation principles.
But am I right to say that you are looking? If you're looking at yours, then are you looking at within, for example, the industrial derating? Are you looking at? And I'm not asking you to presuppose what the minister decides. I recognise that you're just providing options. But are you looking at, for example, what would happen if you, for example, tapered or cut off it above a certain rateable value? Is that the kind of option you're providing?
Well, I mean, if you were to cap it, for example, or to sort of say you're only allowed to get support up to a certain amount, I don't think that would fall foul of the subsidy rules, because you're rolling back from the existing support.
It's less of a
it would only be where you're reorganising it to such an extent that you're targeting different groups, or where you're providing more support, that you would fall.
What you're saying is any specific change, for example, it sounds like any specific change to any of the domestic rating system, non-domestic, would have to be relatively blunt in terms of intervention to avoid falling foul of state aid rules, or to involve engaging in state aid rules.
Well, whether it falls foul of state aid rules or the UK Subsidy Control Act.
Sorry, I should just say that in general. That's a different kind of state aid. It's still state aid rules, just they don't call it that because it's a European term. The fact the same things, the subsidy control regime. But what you're saying, so either you do it in a kind of blunt, we are above a certain rateable value, you don't get, it's capped or tapered or whatever, and that probably wouldn't fall foul of a subsidy control regime. But anything which is like, well, we are going to, if you are in a particular sector, you'll kind of the full benefit, or the
well, I suppose it's
revenue thresholds, all of that.
Yes, in the first instance of whether it triggers a reassessment under the subsidy control, so we don't need to do it at the moment for industrial rating because it's established. If you were to retarget it, you would have to undergo full subsidy control assessments to make sure it was compliant. I would say, though, by its very nature, some things the rating system is designed to sort of target quite well, which we saw with the legislation that we put in place during COVID to try and support certain sectors. But generally speaking, rates isn't always the ideal vehicle to provide support through. You know, it's by its very nature, it's blunt because it's always based on the property.
You are looking to, I think I've correctly, you are looking at options, but the options tinkering too much in too subtle ways just creates other potential complications. One final question is on the vacant property relief. Am I right in saying our non-domestic vacant property relief is basically the most generous in the UK or Ireland?
Well, ours is 50%.
Yeah.
50% forever until it's derelict, basically.
Yes, and
I
think in England the local councils can set their own levels. It's discretionary. Some of them are 50, 70, some of them 100% liability. But it's
none that
are.
Yeah. Are you aware of any that are 50% sort of
off the top of my head?
Forever and forever and a day until.
Well, they're all forever and a day, but I don't know of any that are 50% off the top of my head. But I can find out.
But are they all forever? Like, I mean, theoretically, you could have. Because ours, as far as I'm aware, it's a permanent 50% relief until, I guess, it genuinely becomes derelict or occupied.
Or occupied, yeah.
But you're not aware of, okay. the south of Ireland, I don't think offer it at all really in there. So, or there might be a kind of there's a few months of relief.
We'll find out.
We can get that for you.
That would be helpful to know. I just
Do you want a cross-jurisdiction comparison?
I think it would be helpful to understand my understanding but I don't. You'll know, and I don't. Is that we are by far the most, and I think the total cost is. I think the total cost is 20 million. Or thereabouts, but that's obviously split between
19 point something.
19.7.
Well, it's broken down in 3 different.
19.7, yeah.
And that is that split between the district and regional? That's split between district.
That's just ours. Bit of that.
That's just the regional bit.
Yeah.
So would there be if that was curtailed, there would be an additional there would be additional money on the district rate too.
Let me see. I think it's for every. If you give me a second.
No problem.
Just the amount that's raised through the additional. I'll give you the exact figures just rather than
guessing. Andrew, you can write it down. But I suppose I'm just interested to.
Yep. So the NDVR, each time you would push that up, it's a 50% liability level at the moment. Every 5% you would push that up generates an extra million for the executive.
Every 5% you push it up from 50%, it generates an extra.
So to push it up to 55% liability brings in an extra million, 60 bring in 2 million, just goes, extrapolates up from there.
Okay, fine, okay.
Every 5% is another million.
Yeah. So if you put it up to 75%, it would bring
$1 million a year.
Bring in 5 million.
So it's okay. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Cheers. If there's no further questions, I think we'll release you for now. Thank you guys. You've got a lot of work to do. I appreciate both your time. Sharon, Andrew, I think we have various bits to which we will follow up with the dialogue. Thank you very much. I think
we'll be seeing each other quite a bit probably over the autumn, but you'll not be seeing Sharon because Sharon's retiring.
When is that? Next week?
Yeah.
Look at that information now before you go.
That's why I was quite forthright. I don't care anymore.
As I said, other people, you do too young, but also wise enough to retire. Yes. But thank you very much for all the evidence you've given us over the years, Sharon, and all the. Maybe we'll bring you back as an independent expert witness. Although you may say absolutely not. That's exactly what he's retiring to.
You might not want me.
I'm through the chair, Sharon. I'm surprised because. Well, anyhow, but best of luck for the future and all the rest of it. Who's coming in behind you?
Sorry, new lady, Sharon Gallagher, so you'll be okay with the name. Just stick with Sharon. She's coming to us from health. A lot of experience on strategic policy development, delivering big operations. So she's a good fit for LPS, and she starts on Monday. So we've got a week of overlap with Sharon and myself.
Steve has already moved on.
You'll remember the name anyway.
Sharon who?
Best luck for the future, Sharon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we'll say all the very best, and thank you for all the briefing and all the.
Well, you're in good hands anyway.
Very much so. Thank you.
Anyway.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Best night.
Best now.
Okay, that was interesting. I didn't expect that, but no, and I think probably very good for her. But she was a very able official, so in some ways concerning that she's moving on. But all the best to her. Okay, we have specific bits of follow-up action. I think that the clerk's taking.
We've noted a number of follow-ups, and we'll get those done through the data readout.
Okay, great. The next agenda item is correspondence. So the correspondence starts at 938 of the meeting pack, and on page 39 of the table pack, there's 17 items of correspondence. Sadly, this is unfortunate. Yeah, important though it is. This is what tends to happen when we return from a break. The first is annual report and accounts. At page 940 of the meeting pack, there are a number of annual reports and accounts. We've kind of touched on one or two already, which were laid in the business office over the summer recess period. The SEUPB annual report and accounts, we have talked about those and them being audited. The DOF departmental report and accounts. The DOF 23-24, the DOF departmental report and accounts 23-24, superannuation and other allowance pension schemes, and DOF departmental report and accounts 23-24, Northern Ireland Public Service is Ombudsman, the NI Statistics Research Agency, the UK Statistics Agency annual report and accounts. Okay, so any to note? I think Vice Chair wants to go.
Yeah, thanks very much, Chair. I just wanted to ask, being relatively new to this and this process and sitting in this committee, just to declare I'm also on the Public Accounts Committee, and overriding the Northern Ireland Audit Office, CNAG, would report anything exceptional on all of the accounts within the Public Accounts Committee. But I just wondered, in terms of all of these accounts that fall under the header of Department of Finance, do we have sight of their audit letters or audit reports, or should we have?
Some of them just report to all jurisdictions. They aren't necessarily under the Department of Finance per se. So on a national level, they will agree to report. So the National Statistics Agency agrees to report, lay their report with all of the devolved administrations as well as UK Parliament, where they are specifically within this jurisdiction, or where we have the north-south bodies where there's both jurisdictions. Yes, we should be able to have all of that.
Yeah, I just think that we've got all of these accounts, but realistically they're long documents. They've got the annual report, it's very corporate. The accounts, rather than overspend and underspend, and if there's nothing fraudulent going on, there's not much else you're getting out of the accounts, but the actual reports, the audit letters, are the ones that are showing the things going on around the edges, anything that is being brought up and reported to the management of the department. So I didn't know, as a committee, do we see those, should we see those? But I think they would certainly be useful if it was.
We get a certain level, Chair. We will know if there's been I've now forgotten the word. If the CNAG draws attention, there's a word. Irregularity. If there's any kind of irregularity, yes, there's always a go-to part. In terms of more extensive paperwork, I suppose it's a case of what we might want, but we will, if there's an irregularity, that will be drawn to our attention through the report, and generally we will then highlight that in the Chair's brief as well. That would be the approach with the ones that are covered in this jurisdiction. With the national ones that just lay their accounts, we generally don't touch, because we don't have a specific role in scrutiny. We're being, if you like, the accounts are being laid for our information rather than for scrutiny. But ones where we have scrutiny, yes, absolutely, we would be seeking to pursue any issues or irregularities.
Okay.
We maybe flag that up more clearly in future. It's a good useful point. I think with this one, because there was nothing being shown up, we sort of had grouped them all together because we have so many. But where we usually get them one by one, we would always flag up.
Okay.
A very long way of saying that. It's all right.
Next are Hansard transcripts. So members, at page 1590 to 1609 of the meeting pack, there are two Hansard transcripts from the meeting on the 3rd of July. So those are to note, unless any member wishes to raise a comment about them. I presume not. 9.9 is relates to the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and you will find correspondence between the Education Committee and the Department of Finance in relation to the end of the Shared Prosperity Fund in March 25 and the establishment of a replacement scheme. We obviously don't know very much about that, what the next British government really intends, or the new UK government intends to do. Obviously, it was aired in the Assembly Chamber this week. So I would suggest that it would be something for us to be kept abreast of, or to ask the department. The DALO is here now, so if you're sure that we are kept abreast of, I think it's really important, particularly given we've taken an interest in replacement funds in the past, and obviously basically let down in terms of actual replacement, and it's been a big topic really since Brexit, so we'd like to be kept abreast. I'm sure the DALO will process that. The next is at page 1618. Big old pack. This I'm sure you all enjoyed going through it. This week, the department has replied to the Communities Committee correspondence regarding work being carried out to address issues raised in a Commissioner for Older Persons report. Members, that's to note the correspondence, unless anybody wishes to make any comment. Okay. Department of Finance, this is the summary of the Chancellor of the Exchequer statement on the 29th of July, which I imagine most people will have processed or at least read coverage of by now. The next is WMS on the closure of the RHI scheme. So, members, on the 30th of July, the Economy Minister made an urgent written statement to the Assembly regarding the closure of the non-domestic RHI scheme, which we discussed earlier on. That is to note this statement, and obviously we have an ongoing interest in that, which we talked about earlier on today.
Chair, I think I'll check, but I think the Economy Committee might have been dealing with secondary legislation on that already.
Yeah, Philip, sorry, through the chair, Philip said they was presented in front of the Economy Committee this morning.
Yeah, so we might just go back.
Even though
and
we
check
were told
that.
we couldn't have access to it because it's confidential, it was raised in the Economy Committee this morning.
We will see if there's any. There might be a Hansard, although I suspect maybe not. But we'll communicate with that committee and find out, Chair, what exactly was going on there.
Great. Yeah. So, members, the next item relates to Fermanagh and Omagh District Council and insurance premiums. So we wrote to Fermanagh and Omagh. So I wrote to the committee requesting the consideration is given to a committee inquiry into insurance premiums in Northern Ireland. As insurance would sit within the remit of the Economy Committee, this may be better directed to that committee. However, I'm going to slightly not contradict that, but slightly append to that the statement that given our ongoing work around financial services, I think we should just keep a watching brief on that. I think insurance is something that is again a reserved matter in the sense that it's part of financial services policy, but it's another example of where there's a very distinct policy or consumer context in this region that isn't always just reflected. That's not to say that regulators aren't interested or aren't doing their jobs. It's just that in a political context it isn't always reflected. Maybe something we can raise with the NI Affairs Committee if they're in terms of their workload, but I think there is a particular thing we can be doing. But it perhaps is something for us to correspond with the Economy Committee about to see if they are planning on.
As you've said, because it's not a devolved matter, it's generally been looked at in the context of consumer rights, which it's the Economy Committee's bailiwick. But in terms of getting briefing, the regulating body has always been very willing to come to any committee, to be honest.
They certainly are. The BIA, or the ABI, I should say. I think it's really important that we take, like, certainly as a scrutiny committee, we aren't bound by the same strictures. We can't legislate about this. The minister can't direct these things, but there is absolutely nothing stopping us as elected representatives playing an accountability role. And let's face it, Westminster does not always restrain itself in terms of talking about or scrutinising issues which are technically devolved. So I don't think we should either.
Chair, I can also check and see if the CMA has done anything about this, because obviously they have nations representatives in Belfast, and are always looking for issues on a local basis that we feed to them. Yep. So yeah. Okay. Deputy Chair.
Sorry, Deputy Chair.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. And I know you referenced the insurance and linking it to consumers. Just made me think in terms of our wider cross-cutting role in terms of public services. Obviously, there'll be significant insurance premiums being paid by our government departments, our agencies, and it's a very specific type of insurance. So if the premiums were to hike, it does have a very direct effect on a number of our public services. It could be worth a consideration of how much civil service and arm's length bodies are.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it might be one for us to. Yeah. I don't know if there's a CPD perhaps, or a part of it might have any kind of insight into that, and a kind of cross sort of Stormont or cross departmental way.
Should be.
There is a very direct impact.
Yeah, well, it's a cost code, like it's a fixed cost, I guess that goes up. Okay, so. We will forward that to the account, but we will also take forward, I think, on that basis. Thank you. The next item is the Equality Commission and an MLA briefing on race equality recommendations. The Equality Commission sent, ahead of the recall on the 8th of August, a briefing on racism and hate in Northern Ireland. That is purely to note. The next agenda item is a memorandum of reply to the Public Accounts Committee from the Department on Mental Health Services in Northern Ireland. We have been sent a copy of the Department's written memorandum of reply to the PAC report on mental health services. So members, if we are agreed, we will forward it on to the Health Committee. Obviously the PAC will already have seen it, I presume, so we'll forward it on to the Health Committee unless members have any queries or regard any further information. Okay, the next item is a written ministerial statement from the Minister regarding a cash advance from the NI Consolidated Fund to the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. At page 1712 of the meeting pack, there is a written statement made by the Minister regarding a cash advance from the NI Consolidated Fund to DERA. This was received by the committee office on the 28th of August and emailed to members on that date. The department has also provided some more specifics on what the cash advance is for, basically to cover direct payments to farmers, which would be needed before the budget number 2 bill, and which so that they would have exceeded their cash limit. We touched a bit earlier on this, the Deputy Chair's remarks, so this can be found on page 1714 of the meeting pack. So this is to note and to forward to the ERA Committee, unless anybody wants, the Deputy Chair, want to say anything more about it.
Yeah, just to reiterate the point that I made before. I think it was Steve Aiken had came back with the email at the the time of the correspondence around the advance, just asking what it was for, and the point I made earlier, if cash flow projections for the year was given, and we were able to have that clarity up front to say, whilst it's over the limit per the budget bill, this was an expected cash payment that was always going to be made, August, September time. It's just the timing of it that's putting it over the budget threshold. It would have just consolidated that and reduced the need for the correspondence and allowed proper scrutiny.
Great. Okay. We're content. The next item is the 21st report of the Examiner Statutory Rules, which is page 39 of the table pack and was published on 6th September. There are no rules referenced for our committee. The next agenda item is the draft forward work programme, which is at page 1717 of the table pack. There's various bits, and I'm going to ask the clerk to brief us.
Chair, just to flag up that we have some briefing next week, particularly interestingly on the financial provisions bill. Members have seen this detail of this coming through. This is a bill that will allow lots of black box spend to be legislated for that has occurred over the last couple of years, and also before we have the final royal assent of the budget bill. We may all have other stuff coming into next week, but I don't suspect we'll have another oral briefing. And then obviously 25th we've got the introduction of the Fiscal Council bill oral briefing from department officials. We don't necessarily have an idea of timescale for the introduction of the bill itself, but obviously officials can answer questions around that. I'm looking at the dialogue in that respect. We also have our update from officials around the public sector transformation board, and obviously we've agreed to a number of actions to pursue around that as well. We'd also we've a plan, and I think we're probably pinned down on that now, to have a closed session with officials around the budget sustainability plan. The rationale for that being a closed session, obviously if members agree this update forward work programme, they'll agree to that closed session, is that this would obviously be a briefing before anything is published. Would be on the back of agreement by the executive, but before anything's published or anything goes to members further in the chamber. So the rationale for the closed session is really because there's a desire not to preempt discussion with members more widely, and also speculation in the media and so on. I think members have already reflected with LPS how that has not necessarily been helpful. Hence the closed session. I just wanted to specifically flag that one up.
This is the I think it's really worth just saying, I don't think anybody necessarily briefed the media to say that. I think what happened is the media just reported a consultation response, and
absolutely.
Does sometimes you do that.
Trying to avoid that unhelpful situation before it's published with a proper expansive explanation of what it is. So we'll get that in advance. But
I'm always tempted to say, Peter, that's like it's unhelpful for whom. But anyway, and people are entitled to see what was paid out. But they did slightly jump the gun in terms of presenting it as agreed policy. So the draft forward work programme is...
It goes right through, Chair, until the 16th. With Fiscal Council, obviously, on the 2nd of October. We've got, members will want to remember this one, Cash Access UK around the banking hubs and so on the 9th, as well as we've got civil law reform officials up on the Marriage and Civil Partnership Bill again. We'll hopefully find more information out on the timescale for introduction of that. And then on the 16th of October, we have Dr. Iona Latu on the gender recognition report that she did with Queen's. We also have a session planned for that day around effective questioning techniques. All committees will cover that, and that's with John Sturrock, who's been before. Some members will recall. We've managed to get him again to come and do that, so it's always a very useful session. That'll be a couple of hours. We'll build that into the 16th. The other things I wanted to flag up are the budget coordination work that we'll do with the other committees. That will follow in and run parallel to the consultations and so on around the PFG that we've already talked about, a lot of that. I'd also like to seek members' agreement, Chair, to pursue an update briefing from the Minister. We schedule that in the next, not immediately necessarily, but within the next maybe 6 to 8 weeks if we can. Where the Minister can come and talk about all the current issues that members have raised, and also seek members' agreement to bring in DSO. We had initially had DSO on our list of planned broad spectrum briefings from departmental officials. I think just with things that have happened in the last number of sessions, it might just be worth getting DSO in to just clarify some issues with them. Find out how they are, just generally have them in for general discussion. We pin more down on that, and obviously they want to know kind of more specific aspects of that. Chair, Mr. Frew?
Yeah, I'm just going to... okay, yeah.
I'll let you finish.
So just very quickly, we also are looking forward to hosting the Inter-Parliamentary Finance Committee Forum in March. I've already started talking to counterparts in Scotland and Wales on content for that, and we'll have a further discussion about what members will want to bring up there. But we also...
Everyone tuck your shirt in and kind of like
visitors are coming. We will be hosting for the first time.
Don't take a biscuit until they have one.
No, absolutely. And also there's going to be correspondence. Chair and Deputy Chair have already seen bullet points behind this, but there'll be correspondence coming for committee approval around a joint approach to the Treasury and a request that we have a reset of relationships and that there is a new and transparent and collaborative era. We've managed to track down a few quotes from the new Prime Minister and Chancellor about doing that, so those will go into that letter. But we'll bring that forward as soon as we have a draft, just to let you know that's on its way. The other thing we need to discuss going forward as well, probably next week, is resurrection of the committee's correspondence previously to the Chief Secretary of the Treasury. We also had written to Michael Gove around levelling up. Levelling up is no longer a name on that office, but I'm assuming the Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner will pick up the same responsibilities, so we're probably likely to aim the correspondence that went to him to her instead. We will bring that back, as I say, hopefully next week, and get members' approval to send it on to the new incumbents. You know, absolutely, yes.
Paul Frew and Steve
Thank you very much for that very thorough forward work programme. I was going to bring up any other business that we bring DSO in. I'm concerned, not only, well, it'll be the department and its agencies, including GRO and others, about their capacity to actually draft legislation. So we are a legislator, and it seems to me that there might be capacity issues right across the board, not everywhere, in every department, but of course we can only scrutinise Department of Finance. So it was basically to ask questions around and get correspondence going as to how many people they have at capacity at this stage, at this present time, who can actually draft the legislation. And ask that of the department and right across their agencies.
Particularly important because we've heard from certainly one minister in particular, but others too, about the limitations on drafting and legislation being. Now, there's certainly no limitation on MLAs and their staff drafting motions, but obviously they have no legal effect. But we've filled many volumes with our motions. But anyway, I think that's a good idea.
It's great that when we're not. It's great when this assembly is motionless.
Be nice if we were legislative for once. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, just quickly, just looking at. I've just seen something else come through. Reference potential statements from the finance minister on maybe Monday and Tuesday about what's come across from our conversations tomorrow. So I'm just thinking on the 18th, maybe if we've got space, I think because that's going to be germane to everything to do with the budget and sort of all the rest of it. So the sooner we can get.
I agree. I was going to suggest. I think if we can get a briefing in a high level, if it's not the ministry, then I'll have a senior official.
I think for the 18th, because we have the space, I think
it would be helpful to have a briefing from a senior official. Just
to.
Yeah, absolutely. To find out, understand where we are.
I think there's going to be a statement probably on Monday. So I don't know that I'm just saying some of the stuff that's
kind of
back and
factual
forth,
briefing about we haven't really had a briefing from the department on where, and we're talking about transformation board, exchequer committee, and fiscal compact, and then there's a multi-year. So I just think it would be helpful to have all that tied up for us and understand what new factually, if people are content. I'm going to ask anyway, either the minister or a senior official. The other points I was going to make were connected to that, and it may be that we're able to cover that in the conversation. I do think we need either specific briefing or a specific strand in a briefing about what work is happening on the multi-year budget piece. How is that being taken forward by the department? Is it being taken forward by the department? I suppose, and I don't mean this in a cynical way, I don't want to get to a situation where we are saying repeatedly that this thing needs to have multi-year budgets, but we then get to a point where officials are telling us, but we didn't have this, or we didn't have that, we didn't know when we were only getting, and we do know that we're only going to get, I think, 1 year in October and then 2 years the following spring. But I have heard, or I think we came up in conversation the other day, that the Scottish government is thinking about doing its own indicative multi-year budget. I'd like to be able to ask the department whether they think there's any feasibility around that, even creating indicative budgets or putting even unconfirmed indicative lines next to major projects so that we can at least, so that kind of thing. I think it would be helpful, even if we could cover that next Wednesday as a kind of particular theme. I think that would be helpful. The other thing I wonder is we have down on the 9th of October that space in for the Cash Access UK. We've asked for that specific. We're giving the clerk and the team a lot of work, but they've had, hopefully they were missing us over the summer, so they're delighted to the Dallow I see smiling with some scepticism, but I think if we're already going and asking the I think various people, including the FCA, and doing some desk research on the financial services policy landscape here. 9th of October, if we already have Cash Access UK, could we look to, I'm thinking of a few potential, and I'll suggest a couple now, but colleagues, feel free to suggest a couple when we discuss this next week. People like the Financial Services Union, who are kind of all Ireland Financial Services Union, trade union, but they have a good insight into the policy landscape. Because their members are on both sides.
They had them in the economy.
Yes, and I mean, if we could get the FCA, if the FCA themselves were willing to brief us on that day, that might make sense. But if possible, maybe it doesn't. The other people I wonder about are I've now forgot UK Finance. I think they were called the British Banking Association, and maybe even the Consumer Council. But those are just initial thoughts from me on the kind of person that we could cover. If people and any other idea, I'm open to any other ideas. Those are just ideas at this point for that day.
flagging Cash Access UK could always be an opportunity to get the show on the road. Remember in their first banking hub that's open in Northern Ireland's in Kilkeel, would always take committee to there, or one of the new banking hubs coming in Warrenpoint or Newcastle as well. So
But all of those towns have something in common. It was quite know them quite a lot.
Yours is open now. The Kilkeel one is
It's been open now
Others are
since last-
mooted, and I
Yeah.
think there's
Very
even one in
pretty
Port
towns.
Rushville. They've just secured a site. This is the
always an opportunity.
Chair, that was the issue as well of trying to get them in as quickly as possible, because
Yeah.
these are opening,
Yes.
and they are clearly not necessarily what the localities need.
I just wonder, there might be something, because I can imagine, I know we've got the marriage of a partnership briefing, but I just wonder, there's a kind of thematic, I think sometimes I don't know if others agree, sometimes having related briefings, doing something on cash access, and then a broader piece about personal banking,
Chair, I'm
your
just gonna
mind's in that
check
space.
whether that's in person. Have they confirmed?
I think soon.
Okay, so that makes it more flexible as well,
Okay.
if they're going to zoom in.
Okay, that's just a thought for the 9th of October, and then the other one I think, but again we can link it to if we do get a departmental official
We
next
have
week as well.
we have our research briefing as well. If you see the research briefing there on the 9th, scope and provision of banking services, including options for banking such as credit unions and hubs, as well as options like development of a mutual bank. We have that briefing as well.
Mhm.
That day, so that might limit
Okay.
the sheer amount of time
Okay.
we have. Just very quickly checking. I think the only member who has a Wednesday morning committee is Mr. Brett. Am I right in saying that, members?
I am I'm now off the procedures committee. I'm theoretically on the Assembly Executive and Review Committee, which has, as far as I'm aware, not met yet for this mandate. So
We can check their meetings. We can check their schedule. Because I'm just thinking in terms of if we did an out visit, just logistically for members.
Sure. Okay. Are people any other comments in the draft forward work programme? So we're going to re-up our correspondence with the Treasury, but are we going to wait until we've agreed a joint approach with our
Yeah, I think that would be
Celtic
useful,
brethren?
Chair, just to make sure we're all going in the same direction. I don't think there's any issue. I think we definitely are.
Yeah.
But it's just once we've got that one done, then I think we all plan to follow it with our own separate correspondence once we've got that in.
Perfect. Okay. If people are content, then I think we've got quite a lot to keep us busy this autumn.
Chair?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the Apple case is very prevalent in the media recently, and if successful, €13 billion could be repaid to the public purse in the south. I think we should contact the Taoiseach office and the Office for Public Expenditure to implore that some of that money, if recouped, goes to help fund public services here, and that they engage with the committee in that process. So hopefully uncontroversial, but I think we should play a role in that conversation.
Well, I don't disagree with it now. There's a question too about process and how we go about it. Can I suggest as a first step? In the SDLP, I'm always more than keen to ask for to think about these kind of cross-border funding opportunities, and I. Like you, the thought had occurred to me that there is potential cross-border links. Can I suggest, as a first instance, we write to both the, it probably is a mix of the Department of Finance, who will have taken the tax, or the Revenue Commissioner taking the tax, the Department of Finance, and the Department of Expenditure, and ask in the first instance what this will all feed into the budget process. Obviously, they're going to have their own budget in October, November, October, I think. And ask for a factual update on that, and my understanding in relation to, because we've talked about Shared Island before, Shared Island has bilateral funding relationships with individual departments here, so they'll give the money directly to either Department of Infrastructure or Newry Morning Council when it relates to Narrow Water, for example.
There's no specific governance mechanism there. It is, as Chair says, more spontaneous.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Would it be more appropriate if we, as Finance Committee, asked the Finance Minister? Has she engaged this?
I think that's a good question. I was going to suggest that too. I think you could just do both of those things. I think you can write to those departments and simply say, can we have just a factual brief? I think at this point it would help to get a factual briefing in their process, because I think it would look a bit, much as I would quite like all that money to flow north in different ways, I think it would be a wee bit previous for us to say, to go in straight with an ask, but if we could ask a factual policy process, given that and I think we would caveat it in the context of saying we're aware of the work of the Shared Island Unit. I think leaving aside different views on various things in relation to the Irish government, most people have seen that the Shared Island Unit has funded some useful things. So I think we can ask a factual question about, could you keep our would you be willing to tell our committee about, I think that would be in order.
Can I suggest I bring that correspondence back?
Yes.
Just to make sure I've captured
I think that's fair.
everything that people might
I think it is fair,
want
because I think it is important that we kind of, in order to get it right, that we kind of see.
Can I make a helpful suggestion?
Yes.
Sort of having been involved in this alphabet stuff behind it. It's a matter for the North South Ministerial Council, which will be through the TEO, who will be the link to that.
Well, it would be in the sense of
because it is because it is a matter of fiscal position. So I think it actually sits with the TEO.
Well, how about this? Why don't we have the clerk will draft a letter and he'll bring it back to us and we can discuss. And what we can do, if needs be, is copy it to the TEO committee. And I think it might be that we ask for a kind of factual update first of all, and we'll see how we go from there. If members are content with that, just to start the process. Just at this point, I wouldn't want us to kind of get into because we can. There's different things we could all sort of want to get the committee to write in behalf of. I think a factual.
Just a very quick one, Chair. I think on the 26th or 27th of this month, there's the first meeting of the Resurrection North-South.
Yes, the parliamentary thing. Yeah, it's in the Ballymascan on it.
It might be, I don't know who's all going to it, but it might be something to raise there and put it on the agenda. Because he has more money, yes please.
The Finance Minister is one of our group of letters. So that would be one to urge her to bring up the issue. So I'll incorporate that.
I think we should do a draft letter. I think my view is that in terms of us getting it right, I think it's a totally legitimate issue to raise. I think it's an important question to ask. And I think the Shared Island Unit's done really important work. I think as a first step in terms of propriety, it might make sense to draft a letter and then it can ask for a factual update on some of these questions and how those decisions are going to be made, and then we will have a better base to know where to go from there. People are
I'd agree with that, Chair, because the Republic of Ireland's government's embarrassed enough having to take this money. So
I wouldn't be too embarrassed to take it, Paul.
There's already a budget surplus, so we'll add to that, and I think given the state of our public services, it works out really well.
I would do a lot of those trains.
So we're coming back with a proposal.
We'll bring
okay.
Because we'll
do. I think a lot of people will have thoughts about.
Yeah.
And all over. I'd imagine there's people in every county in Ireland have thought about how they about how that money can be spent, and that's just right. Okay, fine. So we have, I think, gone through pretty much everything.
Yeah.
The next item is any other business. Anybody want to does anybody wish to raise any other business? No? Okay. In that case, date, time and place of next meeting. The next meeting is here next Wednesday, 18th of September.
Still in here, members. We haven't got movement on the Senate yet.
Although some of us
we're
were
not
in
the
the Senate
BBC.
a while ago.
But it's the Zoom screens
okay.
and stuff. They're still just having to work away just to get those right.
So I'll just put the committee is now adjourned. The committee is now adjourned.
Thank you, members.
Committee Room 21. Sound.